right, we're ready to get started. The first time, this is the inaugural City Council work session in this room, right? So, congratulations to us, I guess. Before we get started, first off, we had a very moving ceremony for Lindy Hockenberry, both in the council chambers next door, but also the Cherry Hill Farmhouse, and we, as a council, will also be feting her coming up. For which meeting, Mr. Shields, do we have our proclamation?
At your next meeting on July 8th.
Okay, so there'll be, I guess, a week-long celebration, which will be fun. And before we get started in the actual agenda, I have some bad news. Edwin Buddy Turner, who's a park enforcement officer, a lifelong professional firefighter in Arlington County, passed away last night of pancreatic cancer. And so I wonder if maybe we could just start the meeting with a moment of silence for him. All right, our condolences go out to him and his family, certainly. All right, Mr. Shields, our first item of business, our main item of business, is the special exception entitlement for the 10 acres next to the school site. Do you have a staff report, or how are we going to start this off?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. We do have a staff report, and I'll ask Carly Aubrey to deliver a staff report, and then after that we'll turn it over to the development team with Falls Church Gateway Partners, and Evan Goldman will give us a presentation of the special exception entitlement and the concept plan that is with that. I'll just note broadly for tonight's meeting, since the last time the council met to discuss the 10-acre economic development project, a lot of things have happened, and I'll just note those briefly. Very importantly, the city and Falls Church Gateway Partners have signed and executed the comprehensive agreement for the 99-year lease for the site that we're going to discuss tonight. The payment number one for that in that comprehensive agreement has been made and has been placed in escrow pending the entitlement process that we're discussing tonight being concluded and the entitlements granted for the developer. And then lastly, the key thing to note is we've also had a groundbreaking for the school. And so those are pretty momentous things for a project that has really been 5+ years in the planning, all with geared towards having the month of June being sort of the critical time for all of these agreements to be finalized. So we're pleased that we're on track. And as council will recall, we did take an extra month on the entitlements to properly respond to comments that were received from our citizens, from boards and commissions, from the council itself, and from our neighbor in Fairfax County. So with that introduction, if I could turn it over to Ms. Aubrey for a staff report, and then we'll turn it over to the development team.
Good evening, Council. So City Council is requested tonight to hold a work session to discuss the revised submission of the special exception entitlement application and the latest draft of the voluntary concessions dated June 27th. A second hearing for final action is scheduled July 8th. The proposed project is a mixed-use development comprised of several buildings under a two-phase development proposal. Phase 1 includes office, hotel, senior housing, multifamily condominiums, multifamily rental apartments, retail, civic and entertainment uses, grocery, and a central open space. Phase 2 includes office, retail, and multifamily condominiums. The first submission of the SCE was received on February 4th. On February 25th, City Council referred it to the city boards, commissions, and community organizations. The applicant's response matrix has been updated to reflect comments received from the boards and commissions and how the revised submission has addressed those, and that is provided in attachment 1A. The additional comments received from Advisory Board of Recreation and Parks and the Tree Commission are provided in attachment 4. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on April 1st and on the first submission and recommended approval of that item. Following that recommendation at the second hearing on May 13th, the council deferred the application to July 8th to give staff and the applicant additional time to address comments. And that was also referred out to the Economic Development Authority and the School Board and the Planning Commission. A revised development proposal was submitted on June 3rd with key changes that are described on page 6 of the staff report, and improvements made to the application are listed on page 7 of the staff report. The project is broken down into commercial and residential, approximately 560,000 square feet of commercial and approximately 924,000 square feet of residential. The residential to commercial ratio is approximately 62% to 38%, and the floor area ratio is 3.6. For the fiscal impact analysis, these are based on estimated unit mix that is subject to change. That will be determined during the special exception site plan. But right now, those are estimated at $5.1 million net annual fiscal for phase 1 and $1.8 million for phase 2, for a total of $6.9 million for the entire development. The school board held a public meeting on June 11th on the revised submission, and they asked the applicant to continue studying the potential school drop-off area and circulation and its proximity to the surface parking lot to optimize safety. They also asked about the height of the phase 2 building and the distance from the school building, and discussed the improvements shown in the shadow study related to height reductions adjacent to the school plaza. A community meeting was held on June 12th to introduce the revised proposal to boards and commissions and the public. Comments and questions were raised in the following themes: landscaping, traffic impacts, parking, retail, environmental sustainability, and adjacent and connectivity. And those are described in more detail in the staff report. The Planning Commission held a public meeting on June 17th on the revised submission and voted unanimously to recommend approval. The updated voluntary concessions are included in attachment 2, and a summary chart of those changes have been provided to council. And with that, if there's not any questions for staff, I'll turn it over to Evan Goldman with the development team to go over the changes in the revised submission.
Oh, perfect.
Yes, that one.
Probably. I may have to stand up for part of this. Good evening, everybody. For the record. Oh yeah, that's great. Thank you. My name is Evan Goldman with EYA. Really excited to be here tonight. We have Laura Schoenfield here as well from P. & Hoffman. Robin is on vacation this week, and I'm on vacation next week. So you get me tonight, you get her next Monday. And then we also have some other team members with us. Amy probably has not met any of you yet, but Amy Friedlander is with EYA. We just hired her. And you have Andrea as well from P. & Hoffman, who you've met before. And then we have some of our team members in the back, our traffic plant engineer, Maria Antoinette, and Dave Lasso. So if you have any questions that go beyond what we can handle, we've got the rest of the team here as well. So first of all, I want to say thank you to Wyatt and Carol and Carly and all of you. And it's been a whirlwind 6-month process to get to where we are today. We were really excited to post the deposit last week and to have gotten through the CA negotiations, which is not an easy document. It's, a 200-page document that's going to live for a very long time. So you were really great partners from a negotiating perspective, and we really appreciate that, and how unbelievably hard you've all worked over the last 6 months. So I'm going to take a vacation next week and very happily not focus on this project for 1 week, and then we will get back and kick off the project in earnest. I'm going to Maine. Yeah. Hopefully some places without reception. Anyway, so tonight the presentation, I'm just going to focus on the key changes from the last submission to this submission, because you've all seen this at this point so many times and are very familiar with it, so I don't want to take up too much time. Well, I'll focus on those changes and why we think they were good and we were excited about them, and why they make the SCE application that much better, and then just answer whatever questions all of you may have about the plan. So, it's funny, this isn't the right version. Uh-oh. Oh no. You know what? You downloaded the wrong version, I'm sorry. Hold on a second. I sworn I Okay. You just need the light, We've got the right presentation now. Now I just need the screen. Sorry. We can, if you guys just want certain pages or a more condensed version, we can email a PDF that's less. Yeah, like if you say we want these 7 sheets, we can just send you a PDF of just those 7 or something. Or... Oh. We decided to go very green with the project. It's going to be extremely sustainable. Can do it. I think you are all familiar enough with the plan that we can do it even with a yellow version. Okay. It's a little yellow. It's a little jaundiced. Okay, so sorry about that for loading the wrong screen, PDF. This is it. So I'll just highlight the few key changes to the plan, and for this part I'll just stand up. It's probably easier. There you go. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, great. So this is the old plan from our last SEE. So when I presented to all of you about a month ago, I only had the new stuff and I didn't have the old stuff, so we had to look at them comparatively. So I've now combined them into the presentation. So what was the original and what the new one is. This is what we had submitted back in February, and you can see the big shared parking garage along the highway, the grocery entrance here at the corner of Commons and 7. The senior housing at that time was up on the in the middle block. And so generally the same diagram, retail on the Commons, some retail on Route 7. The Commons was essentially the way it is going to be shown today. The new retail plan is this. The Commons is the exact same. It's been shifted approximately 15 feet closer to Haycock to make the blocks on the west side a little bit bigger. The grocery has moved down to the corner of Haycock and 7. Now it's for a number of reasons, but partially in response to comments we'd heard at boards and commissions about enlivening Haycock and 7 and maybe retail and not having back of the residential part of the building. And so we've created that portion of the grocery store here, and now we have all retail on the street. So we have less of the retail taken up by grocery. We've added what's called Alley 1. We'll have a better name than that. But the idea is this cool kind of corner of the street. It's a shared street with retail on it, condo entrance, residential entrance, and it leads right back into the garage. You can see at the edge of the plan. The garage is now pulled back off of Route 7 and it's kind of hidden on the back of the project. Another change, so that gets rid of the concern about what the design of that garage is going to be like on 7 in front of the school. Another change, this was in response to, we had a lot of comments about sunlight and daylight. So senior housing being one of the tallest buildings in the project, we originally going to be in that mid block, where the block is probably exactly. By moving that to the upper right, block D, it's now on the northeast of the plot project. Oh, I can point with this thing, can't I? Oh yeah, there we go. So by moving it from here to here, now it's on the northeastern part of the project, and so afternoon it won't be blocking it with daylight, the sun, so this whole side of Main Street will be much brighter as a result of that move. And then it also takes one of the tallest buildings in the project further away from the school, another back from there. We've also made modifications to the building that's directly next to the school. So this was the original plan by use. And so up here we have the hotel building, senior housing, office,
big residential building here, condos here. And in the new plan, essentially we flipped these 2 blocks. And so you have the multifamily rental building. We've broken this into 2 blocks instead of 1. Break down the scale along the 7 ACON. This is now the micro rental building. This is the hotel, and the senior housing building is here. And so what's nice is we pulled what was a bar of hotel here is now here. Pulled some of the massing away from the school. And this is a kind of a 2-story portion of the building. It's the plaza, so sunlight perspective, daylight perspective too. And then it gives us this opportunity to create this kind of cool turnaround where the hotel drop-off is here off of Main Street, so you can have a covered area without, and go to the hotel lobby. We are still studying whether these 2 buildings might switch, and so one of the things that you see in our proposal is this alternate plan where those buildings might flip spaces. They're the same height, so it's not a height issue. And if that were to happen, that drop-off would go this way up to Mustang Avenue. So that's something we're still studying. One of the big benefits of this plan is it takes the Phase 2 office building, which used to be up here, and moves it down to Route 7, which is just a better office address, more prominent, and right next door to the existing office, or the office building in Phase 1. And so we'll have these 2 office buildings next to each other. Gives the ability to kind of expand tenants from one to the other, and have that feel like that's the project. But everything else on the main level here is very similar to what it was before. The music venue, which used to be here, is now here, so kind of flip corners, and it's part of this central block experience. So we'll have people up. So those are the main changes to the design of the project. We're obviously now 9.5 acres versus 10.5 acres. So the way we were able to achieve that density was as follows. Number one, we did take advantage of some of the feedback we heard about APOC being wider than it needs to be. And so some of the lanes are wider than it needs to be. There's some heating space that's a good change. And so this is now a 5-foot shorter crossing distance to get from Federal Realty property to our property, which will make it more pedestrian friendly. It does not change the auto lanes. Other lanes, that stays the same, but it does make it faster for pedestrians to cross the street there. And so that was one of the ways we picked up a little bit of square footage. The other way we picked up a little bit of square footage is that Street A is a little narrower than it used to be. 60 feet, it's now 50 feet, depending on where it is. And it will be more of a urbanist experience in different parts of the world. One are talking about shared space with cars and the third place where we did pick up a little bit of space is that these 2 buildings are on a shared lot line with the school now, whereas before they were set back 10 feet. It's didn't have the space to do that anymore, so it's the property line. And so as a result of the easement on the school property along that edge. So those are the main changes that allowed us to keep the square footage uses the same as where they were, and the same program will fit everything. I won't go through this chart, but this is all the square footage uses. This hasn't changed from our original submission, so it's still the same number of unit counts, the same minimums and maximums. These are the 2 alternate plans I mentioned before. So the idea that the hotel and the senior building hotel and micro building might flip. We're generally headed in the direction that we see in the plan. We just wanted this as a backup. And then similar here, we did reserve the right for the senior building to go back to this location just in case, and that's only if we aren't able to get, we don't think this is an issue anymore, but just for some reason, the property may be shrinking on 9 so 9 acres, smaller. This line would essentially come straight down. We couldn't fit the office building here anymore. So the office would go up here, Phase 2 res would be here, and then the senior housing would be able to fit here anymore. So that's a kind of a backup alternate plan just in case. 3D drawings, these have been updated. And so you can see the shorter buildings now up against the school. The office building is tall, but it's about 200 feet from the school. And what you're seeing here is this potential school drop-off. So that's, given everything the schools were working on to try to get through start construction, we all agreed to table the summer, figuring out how this drop-off is going to work. And so, let's go back to the plan for a second. There we go. So Street A could just loop around like this if needed, but ideally it would go through and then have that school drop-off at the golf park. And so the school is trying to figure out how to fit their parking count. just show you the few other changes. These are all in your packages. These are the new shade studies, but as always, our site, because of the way we're looking at short days, is like shaded buffer from the rest of the school. Other than December, in the winter, in the morning and the winter at 8 a.m., everything is in shadow. The sun has just come up. Parking, this hasn't changed. This has not changed. So what has changed is, as I mentioned, Baycock has gotten a little bit narrower, the lane widths and the median, and so, sorry, that's not, yeah, that's Baycock. And so you can see the old section right here and the new, sorry, the new section up here. So we've shifted it over a little bit. We are doing this really nice big kind of 9'6" tree amenity along both Baycock and 7th. So another comically better drive. And so instead of 6 foot tree pits, those are now 9'6". We'll have areas within them where it cuts into the tree pits to allow for houses. But we'll have these nice big contiguous tree pits. We're also going to take advantage of the city standard, which allows for 3 trees in a continuous pit versus Google pits. Now it will give us a kind of almost a 90-foot long tree pit. So not a lot of The other change is we're now showing 2 different bike solutions. The original bike solution, which is the cycle track on the road, and the solution with the bikes up on the other side of the curve. And so this is something we're going to study over the next 2 months, and when we come into SNSP, we'll have to work with staff. And our latest thought is, depending on where the traffic study goes, that this actually might be the better solution. And the reason for that is, in the future, if we need a left turn lane out of this road, especially now that we don't have a left turn lane, Mustang Alley might need to be a right 2-lane plus a turn lane. And so if we need that extra width in that road, we can come out of the bike lane, and the bike lanes can go up. And still have a that might be a couple of up 6 months before we see and show interim.
Where would there be a left turn that we might need a left turn?
So in
Is
the
it a left?
plan, put you in the plan. So we've shown this as a 1-lane in, 1-lane out road. If this becomes a real traffic light, which is something that asked of us for a number of our boards and commissions meetings, it would be logical that cars would want to make that left turn. And so then, in order to have traffic flow, we would have a typical right lane and a left lane out, and that would be a left turn. So one way to achieve that is, in the interim condition, you have 2 lanes, just 1 lane in, 1 lane out. Virginia Tech develops, the city, the schools, 20 feet of land on the north side of that street, and Virginia Tech will be set back from that 20 feet, so you'll have this 30-foot area. And one option is we turn the bike lane into a turn lane and stripe it with the bikes then up on the new curb, sidewalk, so there's plenty of space for it. There's not enough width, so so the street's just not wide enough. So you could do it by reducing the sidewalk on the south side, but it's already a small sidewalk. And the left turn lane will probably become more of an issue when you have it fully built out. The first part of the project is the full build out of the project will. And so that would be that's possible. So, yeah, so right now you guys, so I'm sorry to say that. The city and the schools own that 20-foot space between our side. So it's something that can't be built necessarily right now, but we know that likely to develop in the future after us. We just think about what the plan is originally about. Have to know and this is the second.
is what's currently planned just hawk signals at both Mustang Alley and Street A? You mentioned traffic lights.
So new traffic light here, new traffic light here, hawk signal here, but likely traffic and everything for everything. Traffic lights, so we're doing the studies now. I would assume that would likely become
I think as we talk about connectivity, especially with the federal royalty, I think it makes sense to make it safer for people, even if Haycock is going to be narrower.
There actually was an interesting side of the West Falls Church. That session, area plan session the other day. They were talking about the idea of maybe center. Even as a front, just kind of cool. So if you could get, the bikers coming from here, then it puts the even more, it makes more uniform. Okay, the last things that have changed. So the landscape plans, these haven't changed much. It's the same concept. Things have just shifted a little bit because this block got a little deeper and this block got a little smaller. So this curved road that we've always had used to be here. It's just shifted about south. But other than that, everything you're seeing here is the same concept. So kind of a green space up on the north side, kind of an outdoor fun active space outside the kiosk, a nice big green space in the center, and kind of stolen that kind of spaces on the south side. And then we like the idea of with the music venue here and the outside music space here, the ability to kind of close down this middle of the project and kind of progress. Just and for people to be able to sit out here, listen to music outside of Black and Gold. Really special. So that's not a change as much as just a shift. And that is the last. That's it. Yeah, those are the changes to the original plan. And then obviously we have the whole SED.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments? Ms. Hardy?
Will have to be good enough. So I'm going to start with questions for staff. So I noticed that the net fiscals on this turn, submission 3, is 5.1 million in phase 1 and 1.8 million in phase 2. I recall that the fiscals last time around were 4.7. So what's changed? Have the unit counts changed, or is it just updated numbers? That's good. We always like better fiscals. Commercial mix changed any? Like more retail commitment?
There was slightly more retail. I think the unit mixes were the ratios were the same, but there was the additional 100,000 micro or additional residential.
Oh, I thought the
So
4.7
that's-
included the micro units because that came with the IA changes, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was mainly the retail and the office.
Going in the right direction, so that's always a good thing. One thing that I don't think we actually talk about enough in the city is how many new workers and jobs are we creating with this? We always obsess about how many new residents. Do you have a sense right now how many new jobs we're adding? Because it is the biggest development we've done.
I would have to ask our economic development chief. I personally don't know that information, but and I can get back to you on that. But I can turn it.
If anyone wants to take a stab at it.
Yeah, so rules of thumb for office is typically somewhere in the, depending on the type of office, somewhere in the 4 to 5 people per 1,000 square feet of office. With, a law firm might be smaller at the 3 to 4, but a more typical or a tech company might be even higher at 5 or 6. And, a shared space like a WeWork could be even 8 to 10. But so if you used 4 to 5 per 1,000, maybe 5 per 1,000 for ease of math, that's roughly 650 people in the first phase office building and roughly 1,000 in the second phase office building. And then you also have the retail jobs as well. So if there's 130,000 square feet of retail, retail jobs is a slightly higher ratio per 1,000 square feet, but they may not work as many hours. The shifts are slightly different. So you may end up in the retail side with more like 8 to 10 workers per 1,000 square feet, which would be in the 1,200 to 1,400 jobs range. And then, if the retailers typically stay open more than a 40-hour day, so those people are spread throughout the week. You're not having those people at the project at the same time, but you might have 2 in the afternoon and 2 in the evening. Senior housing, I don't know, but there is a good employee count on senior housing because of the assisted living component. So I can get you numbers from our senior housing partner on that, but I actually don't know the answer. And do you have a sense for hotel?
Not off the top of my head. No.
You don't need to have the answers tonight. I
Okay.
think in general, it's just something that I'm personally interested in because as we think about development with the city, I think it's just important to think about adding that daytime population.
Right.
And office clearly brings that, but with such a big development, I think there's opportunity to talk about that more.
Agreed.
So moving on to the plan. So besides the hotel and the micro unit potential swap, you mentioned things that might change between now and SESP. What else might change?
Sorry, I'm just writing down the question, number of employees, so I don't forget. Okay. Things that might change that aren't on here. So the big thing that could change would be if for some reason, there's a battle between the city and Fairfax County and we can't agree on what the parcel is going to be in some point, which we don't expect to be an issue, but and the parcel got smaller, then that obviously would force us to move things around. We don't expect that to happen. So the main one is the one you mentioned, which is the swapping of the micro and the hotel.
I guess I'll just add to that.
Yeah.
I think that that's something we're going to be able to resolve probably in the next 3 months or
Right.
so. We're planning to bring architects on in the next 3 weeks and start doing some test fitting to see how we're also planning to choose our hotel brand in the next few weeks. So we'll actually have real metrics to be working with and see how things are fitting in.
But you generally think that the blocks will stay the same.
Yeah.
'Cause we've had some big shifts. I think they've all been good changes.
Yeah, and all those shifts are pretty typical in if you think about how this process has gone, we were selected in November and now here we are. Typically those shifts would have been happening prior to us submitting a plan. We would have been doing all that work over the last 3 to 6 months and then would have submitted a plan right about now. That's more typical. So we've kind of been doing the work with all of you over the last 6 months, which I think has actually been really helpful because we had a ton of community input and we've been able to work with all of you in the schools. But now we're at a point where these buildings work. We are about to bring on all the architecture teams for the individual buildings and start actually designing the buildings so they won't just look like blocks and figures anymore. And so we can't really have them move much anymore because we're going to be spending money on architecture. So any other changes, I'd say the things that could create changes would be if there's something from a utility perspective that we just didn't realize that comes up where we need to shift something because of a utility. Once again, we don't expect that to happen. We've done a lot of due diligence on the site. And then really this hotel micro rental building shift. I don't see much else that would change the project. I'll say one more. If for some reason the grocery that we are targeting, we have 2 grocery stores that we're targeting right now. If for some reason a third one that we're also talking to ends up being interested in that becomes the player, they're slightly bigger. So that could change the size of that block, the multifamily block.
Actually, I'll add one other thing. We're still working through the parking counts to make sure that we have kind of, I think that the hotel and the micro switch could affect exactly like where the concentration of parking would be, but we're still working through just kind of one garage on the west side, one underneath the condo and apartment, and then that the above grade garage by the senior. So I think those are things that floors could shift a little bit on that too. But
You mentioned choosing your hotel brand pretty soon. Do you think you're going to announce any of these big choices soon?
Probably not until it's under contract. Which would be,
yeah, we'll have to talk to the hotel. In my experience, you usually don't announce until the management agreement is signed, which is probably a year after we get started with the hotel. But I think that we could see what's going on.
And same for your other anchors, I presume.
Yeah, the grocery, our goal is to have a lease signed by the end of the year. So in that case, if we get that lease done in time, we would announce it. Our thought is to pick somebody by August and then try to get the lease executed by the end of the year, maybe first quarter of next year. So, I mean, I think I would assume by next summer, there'll be a number of announcements from grocery to some retailers, hotel, the senior housing brand, all of that stuff. And then to the extent we get things sooner, we'll actually work with the city and, because it's you're part of this, so we'd want that to be kind of an announcement and a celebration of the project as well as the city.
I think actually the first thing that we'll be able to publicly discuss is the senior housing, because we're still in discussions with multiple options right now, but with the SESP January submission deadline, we will be making sure that they're moving forward with the design also. So that's the first thing we've got to nail down.
Yep.
So getting tactical, on the plan, you talked about kind of, there's an open question about the school drop-off. Have you thought about kind of a Uber or Lyft drop-off? Would that be the same area?
It'd be the same area. So part of the reason there's a few reasons we really hope that does happen. One, we think it is the better way to handle school drop-off, just because it would be hard. If not, Street A would dump into the school parking lot essentially, and then the parents would drive around the parking lot and back out. So it creates just a less functional way to do drop-off, where the drop-off is being potentially interrupted by people backing in and parking into spaces because it's in the drive lanes. But that's a school's operation issue, and so they're looking into that. Number two, as you just mentioned, having a place at evenings and weekends can also be a place for Uber to drop off is really critical for the project, so we like that. And then the third thing is we really loved that Street A came through to Mustang Alley evenings and during the non-drop-off and pickup times, so that to the extent cars came in here, they did have the ability to get back out or circulate back out through the grid of streets. And without that connection through, you lose that part of the grid, essentially. All those cars have to stay on the Commons Drive. So those are the three main reasons we hope it happens. We understand if it doesn't, but if it does, it'd be great.
I hope it works out too, but if it doesn't, I'd encourage you to think about a different place for ride-sharing drop-offs. Personal pet peeve of mine is people do it all along Broad and Route 7, and it just stops traffic, and that's just way too busy there and
Agreed.
unsafe.
So we have two other things that work from a drop-off perspective. Because number one, because we have to have 20-foot clear for fire engine, we have the drive lane, the bike lane, and the rumble strip collectively are 20 feet. So the good news is if cars are pulling over to drop off, there will be a full 10 feet to get around the cars and not stop traffic. And then we also have the Wooner space here, which will function as a really nice space because that's not a heavy traffic street, where we can kind of mark that as a place for Uber as well.
Can you talk about the entrance to the parking? Is it in the garage at the top is the main source, or where do people go in and out?
So there's now two garages. So what used to really be all handled in one large garage is now spread into two. This garage here has an entrance off Mustang Alley as well as an entrance off Street A, so cars can go in both directions. The below grade parking that's underneath all of this is entered right here. So you come in and go down. And we did that specifically to separate the cars coming to the office in the morning from the cars doing school drop off. So there's no reason why, there's now no mixing of those cars. There's no reason a parent would ever be on this street because it doesn't go through to the parking. And there's no reason for our office worker to be here because it doesn't lead to the office garage. So that's why we did that.
So having been at Mosaic over the weekend, their main intersection now is a mess.
Right.
It's a four-way stop, and I think the fact that they have their entrances to their garages close to that intersection means they just have to shut down the intersection on weekends now.
Right.
So a good lesson learned for us is to actually think about parking entrances kind of
Yep.
on the outskirts so that people don't clog up your nice commons area.
Right.
With that, so that's good.
And
to hear.
we did that, if you remember, I had this exhibit back here. Oh, of course I went the wrong way. Let's see. There it is. So, where'd it go? There. Stop. Okay. So, so we'd always designed the commons with that in mind, with the idea that for festivals we may want to close down the street and still let the traffic flow. So even in the new plan, the garages still are completely accessible off of the side streets, and this garage as well is accessible off of this street right here, coming off of Route 7. So we can literally close down this 2 acre space for festivals and still have it all function. So that does alleviate some of the traffic from the main Commons Drive.
Next question. Phase 2 office, it's ways away, but I noticed that the square footage for that was smaller than what we had at CA, perhaps. So, Carly, this was in the chart in the staff report. I think it was 200,000 versus 265. Is that? Have we lost 60,000?
Hold on a second. Let me go to that chart. So 265 had always been kind of the maximum square footage of that office building, which it still may be, depending on how parking is dealt with. So the big issue would be, to the extent there's less parking demand for future office buildings, and we can build that building with a lot less parking, then we have within the 15 stories the ability to build a larger building. In the current design, we're doing a little bit of podium parking to fit the parking, and so we only are able to have roughly 10 stories of the actual office building itself, which is for 200,000.
Is
So I
the
think,
podium parking what they do in Tyson's, where they have the above ground?
yeah, exactly.
garage and they build
Above
off.
the lobby and do it night, something nice on the skin. So that I think part of that will just depend in 4, 5, 6 years what parking demand ratios are as to how much of the height is parking versus office.
And is that factored into our phase 2 fiscals then? That decrease in office? Okay. Okay. We haven't gotten to VC, so I'm going to save my VC questions, I guess, or all the questions now. Why? Do you plan to talk about VC separately? So do it all now. Okay. So moving on to VCs. I was glad to see the public art amount increase from 25,000 to a more realistic 100,000. I think I noticed in your amenity plan you're still committing to 5 pieces of art. Fast charging stations. I noticed that there was one fast charging and I think maybe a different number for just regular charging. Staff, do we have a policy on like a ratio per number of cars or per number of housing units? And if not, should we have one so that we can figure out what
For the EV stations?
yeah, like
No,
how many
we-
should we have per, for a garage, or how many cars we expect? Okay, so I think there's good ratios on how many we should have. Because I can't say whether this is enough or not.
Yeah, we currently don't have anything in code for that, so it'd be something we would probably look at neighboring jurisdictions to see if they have anything, or we would have to do kind of a best practice study.
Yeah, I guess I would like to know whether that is best practice, and if not, we should get it to there. Tree lights. So I know way more about tree lights than I would like to know at this point. So I would love to see stronger language from you all, not only just coordinating with the city, but just taking care of the tree lights and having your street trees lit. So I think it's a really nice, festive way to kind of build community and character. I think right now the language says coordinate with the city on it.
Got it.
But it would be nice if you just owned it. Likewise, on shared parking. So right now the language in there says that there's 300 spaces for FCCPS events and things with the schools. I actually think Rec and Parks has a fair number of things, like the July 4th celebration. People will be able to go to. So I imagine there would be community events where surge parking would be beneficial as well. So I don't know if we need that language slightly expanded so it just doesn't say school events, but it's school and community events could have access to that surge parking.
Yeah, as long as it's limited to where we have to be a little careful is we don't want to be in a situation where people then don't come to the restaurants because they know that parking is an issue at the project. So essentially the surge parking is we wouldn't have events at the property those nights where there's going to be other events going on. Schools needed the parking. And the initial conversation with the schools, it was kind of like, the 8 to 10 times a year where the school just has crazy amount of demand. And we're happy to coordinate with Parks and Rec if we're doing something jointly. Like fireworks obviously is going to benefit all the retailers. That makes sense. So we would just do something jointly. Where we have to be careful is it can't just be open-ended where Parks and Rec are like, oh, every week we're going to do blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden our restaurants aren't thriving because nobody's coming to eat there. So I would be nervous about adding stronger language. But we have language in here about us working with Parks and Rec on coordinated events throughout the year, which we want to do anyway, which I think are going to overlap with the things you're probably talking about. If they want to do a jazz festival or an arts festival, we're going to want to do all that too. So I think that you have the right motivation aligned to do events that are going to drive traffic and then retail sales. So, and in those cases, those are the events. So I think that makes sense, if I'm not explaining that right. But I don't want to commit to something where in 5 years when things are different, we have an operations situation. The city's like, well, no, those are our 300 spaces. We need those all the time. So,
Yeah, I think what has been discussed is that at the beginning of the year or at an appropriate time over the course of the year, we would sit down together and say, here are our dates, and plan it out well in advance. And whether those are school or community, I think the key thing is there's a plan and there's an understanding about how many times a year this is going to occur.
I think they'd be limited, and so I agree with Wyatt that we would sit down in advance. It would not be an open-ended agreement where we just get surge parking for any community events. I just wanted to clarify that it's not only school football games. It might be the big festival that Rec and Park might do once a year there.
maybe it's adding community to that.
I guess can you just clarify like how that situation would the Parks and Rec are having a festival with everybody. What do you see it like the big difference between doing surge parking or for the versus just the parking open, people can come park there. Whether they're going to a restaurant, whether they're going to the festival.
Just using July 4th as an example, like if they come up and see July 4th fireworks, it'd be nice to know that they have parking available for them, different than you might be going to dinner on July 4th.
So it won't be that. So we should clarify that. So the idea here is we have 300 spaces we're building for the office building that we're going to just have open open evenings and weekends for anyone coming to the property. And we have enough parking to handle a typical night at the shopping center, from a retail perspective, even without those 300 spaces. But on like a happening great Saturday evening when we've got a music event and we've got some stuff going on, those 300 spaces are going to go. So the way we would deal with it is we just won't coordinate, we won't plan our own events. So if it's July 4th, we're not going to also have a music event that same night and other things going on, so that those 300 spaces should be enough to offset some of the parking for July 4th. But it won't be like separate parking for July 4th goers versus restaurant goers. If you come to a restaurant, you're just going to park just like everybody else. So it's a shared parking model, which is the way you maximize use of parking. And the coordination is really critical. So that's why for us, it's important that it's recognize that it's not every Saturday, that it's it's for these key events like July 4th, like a Memorial Day parade, like a graduation, big football game, the key events of the year where you're going to have a lot of activity in. So that we can then also program events and music and things that are going to make people help restaurant. So does that help at all?
Yes, as long as, I guess, for that coordination, I guess it's more of a coordination,
Yes.
works for school events, then I think the same models would be fine for community ones. But I just think I just want to see the language not just specify only schools, because the Parks and Rec board had called that as a comment for me,
Right.
and they wanted to make sure they were included in this too.
Yeah, I'm fine adding that. And I think the way it should probably function, and we'll figure this out in operations really later. Bethesda, for example, there's the Bethesda Urban Partnership, which acts somewhat like a bid, and then there's Federal Realty, which owns the lion's share of the retail and a part of the city, and they meet quarterly and coordinate. And I think that's probably a significant thing that you have to do. The property manager of this project will probably want to have a quarterly meeting with somebody from schools, somebody from Parks and Rec, somebody from the city, and kind of map out, as you said, what it means 9, 12 months. So, because our goal is that the city does have a number of events here that are coordinated with us, so that if we're doing jazz,
Should be synergistic, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Last question, and then I'll pass it on. So phase 2 office, where you have the red dashes right now, how much extra land into the school parking lot did that take?
60 feet by 200 feet, so that's 12,000 square feet, so about a quarter acre.
So when I get to the second agenda item, we'll talk about how we'll do that with the land conveyance. I'll save my question then. Thank you.
Can I just note one thing for the council's information? And I think you may be aware of this, but with respect to shooting fireworks for the 4th of July, there is a code provision that fireworks must be a certain number of feet away from any structure. With the new high school, there will be no place where we'll be in compliance with that rule. And so we have not formally announced that this is going to be the last time that we can shoot fireworks from the baseball field, partly because we want to just work it through and make sure that is in fact the fact, but that is our initial read of it. So I wanted the council to be aware of that and the development.
It's not us, it's the school. Okay. Wow, that's a shame.
So it's a problem that I don't think we have the final answer to it, but that seems to be a serious issue. I think it might even be federal, but it's, the fire marshal administers the code. These shoots are highly regulated. Just because of the size, these are big mortars that we're shooting on. Anyway, just as an FYI, we'll continue to work. I want you to be aware of that.
So the parking garage for what would be phase 2 office, if it is office over that kind of podium parking, There's a provision in parking about the spandrel height. So maintaining that 42-inch height so it doesn't impact, you don't have people going into residences. I don't see anything in there about the schools. I don't know if that can be added as well. Simply because there are meetings that take place in Maryland and Henderson at night sometimes, or at other points there in the front of the building. It can be distracting depending on pulling into that garage at night. Probably on Pike Road, but I'd still like to see that in there to maintain that spandrel height. So yeah, I'll go backwards. I'll start with VCs and then get into the plan itself. There's mention about providing bike storage. And I was wondering if you guys had any plans, and I don't even know how to be prescriptive about this, if there are any plans to include bike rooms in the office buildings as well?
Yeah, so there's bike. I'm going to hand this to you from a lead perspective. I think we have to have bike storage from
Inside, like an actual bike storage area?
Like inside the actual building. I mean, I think that would be a discussion. It depends, I think, on the tenants. You know, if we definitely a tenant could have bike storage within their space. I don't know if we would require that on the floors.
I thought, we'll have to look into this. I think from a lead,
Well, I do.
have to have indoor bike storage somewhere.
I actually think, sorry, I didn't bring the lead scorecards. That would have been a good thing to bring tonight. But I think that this is one that we couldn't go for because, as we've seen at the wharf, the amount of bike parking to get the points is like absurd. It's like we have 2,000 bike parking spaces, something insane. There's huge rooms that are just empty because the demand just is like not caught up at all with what the rules are. So I'm not sure we're going to be doing it from a lead perspective, but definitely bike parking is going to be important on the surface. I'm sure we'll have some of it. We haven't started designing the garages, but definitely some rooms in the garage. And then I think we can talk about with the office.
I was in an office building in London a few months ago, and they had just a really cool bike facility. It's very compact, but it had showers, bathrooms, storage, a place where you could actually fix a bike. And the way that they had it positioned, they had a space probably the size of this room, right, 100 bikes stacked up there. It just was really cool, and it was a huge amenity for the employees that we had in our space in that building. And it encouraged a lot of them to actually consider biking some of them for miles, simply because of that facility, because it basically gave them everything that they needed, like soup to nuts when they arrived. And if there were any problems with the storage and being secure and the access to it, and showering and changing, so it's something that if we could accommodate or something you guys consider in terms of the program in office buildings, it's just one more kind of notch on the belt in terms of encouraging the walking site.
Yeah,
Just look at that at SCSB.
Yeah, and I think we're looking into what the right amenities are for the office building, so that's definitely under consideration. And I think sometimes with that amount of space, it would just be what's the trade-off in terms of our expectations for, how every square foot is used, because it's a pretty compact.
No, I
office
get it.
building
I
at
get
this
it.
point.
It was something I had not seen in buildings around here that I thought was just a really nice amenity. It was received very positively by tenants in that building, for the folks that I actually got a tour about what it's worth.
Yes, we'll definitely look into that.
Can you guys explain to me, in your opinion or your understanding of what the red line comment related to net neutral to you as it relates to the cash conversion? What does that mean to you? Can you say net neutral in terms of the calculation for what the cash is?
Yeah, so basically that from a return perspective. Oh, sorry. When we calculate the return for the project, that changing the units from market rate to affordables or paying a fee is neutral to us. We don't care one way or the other, right? We're neutral between those two options from a financial perspective.
So I understand that the formula for how we would derive what the value of those units would be if converted to cash is pending.
Yeah.
We haven't decided on what that would be.
Right.
I don't know, maybe this is a question to put out to staff, but I would, if possible, like something a little more prescriptive other than net neutral, just because of the subjectivity associated with that value. What is that formula? I mean, is it based on 10-year DCF? What are the metrics that are used? What are the inputs? How far out are we looking? Because just like we could appraise a building, I don't want to have conversations about what the value of those apartments are based on possibly a downturn in the market. We're having that conversation, but you guys don't look at the downturn in the market looks to be. We know that 10 years from now, they're going to be worth a lot more. So I don't know what the answer is, but I do like the idea of it being a little bit more tangible and concrete. I think we've struggled with that. I wouldn't say struggle with it. It's been kind of just wait and see. We'll address it. I don't know why, if you get any comments on that for other projects where we've done that.
That's correct. We have never accepted cash before, so it is a new thing for us. And in Founders Row, where we do have the cash option, there's a methodology that we've discussed with them and that we're essentially on the same page with them on. We need to have further discussions with Falls Church Gateway Partners to have a clarity of how we would do. We're moving in that direction. We just have to report right now, and we don't have that clarity yet.
Does that methodology involve appraisals?
Well, I think for a one-bedroom unit, the market rate versus the ADU rate, those are known quantities. And so I don't know that that's going to be the point of dispute. The delta between market and ADU. To our mind and our methodology, what probably becomes the most contentious point is how you do the present value analysis. What discount rate you use, how many years you use. Those are the two things. I think that's probably what our discussion ultimately is going to need to resolve. Discount rates can change over time. So how you set that out in stone right now is, I think, a question we have to figure that out also.
And I'd mention also, like, we don't feel the need to have a buyout provision. That's not something we're trying to do. The buyout provision is something the city wants, not something we want. So we need to be careful to make sure that it is fair, because it'd be something the city would be saying they want to do to us versus us saying we want this to be done. So we're perfectly happy to have the affordable units on site, in our buildings, and I think it's appropriate to have affordable units mixed within the building. But to the extent the city wants to cash out and take the money to use it for something, that's fine, as long as it's a fair calculation. And so the term net neutral, I don't know if that's exactly the language from the Montgomery County Affordable Housing Code, but there's a similar concept there where if there's a buyout, it's based upon essentially being net neutral to the developer, so you're kind of fine. It doesn't matter either way.
How have you guys addressed it in other jurisdictions?
So the only one where we've ever done a buyout was Alexandria. And let me think about that. In Montgomery County, yeah, we've never done one in Montgomery County. I think the only one I've ever done is Alexandria. So I've done it in two different ways in Alexandria. In one case, in a project we did in North Old Town, we actually purchased, or we proposed and didn't go this route because the city ultimately decided not to, but we were going to purchase units in older buildings in Old Town and be our affordable units versus in the building, and thus provide more affordable units because they're less expensive than for us to build new. That was a concept we had proposed. But I don't think we've ever actually done a straight buyout where we've just paid a fee in lieu. In Fairfax County, I believe there's like a formula where it's a specific dollar per square foot, and we can find out what that is or how it's calculated.
And Arlington does that as well. Arlington almost always does cash.
Right, that's right.
And so they have a formula that we've looked at. So I think that will inform our discussions as well. To try to get this. The way they do it is so different, though, because everything is about density and FAR feet, and that's really not what the situation is here. So,
Right, you're buying the density by doing more affordable.
Yeah, I'm just a little uneasy with the subjectivity of the unknown aspect of that.
But what I'll say this: that's not the base plan, right? The base plan is we're building affordable units. To the extent the city decides they want cash to build units elsewhere, then, to some extent it becomes a negotiation, right? Because we should have the right to keep the units and not sell them if we don't want to. If you're asking us to pay more for them than what would be market, we would have the right to say sorry. And
No, I understand.
so you're going to negotiate to a price where both parties are
I understand the concept.
comfortable.
I mean, I understand the concept of net neutral. I think the way that you guys understand it is the way that I would understand it. However, like any negotiation, you want to make sure that you get a fair share. Cash in lieu can be very material for us in terms of solving for other affordable housing issues,
Right.
which is the reason that there is a cash in lieu provision this time. just to bank that money.
Oh, agreed. Yeah.
So the formula behind that, I mean, wouldn't you think it would be fair to value it based on the underwriting that you guys submitted in terms of approval related to this project? I mean, using the baseline underwriting,
Yes
adjusting
and
the
no.
cap rate, and adjusting the rent.
If you guys would agree to that, that'd be great. Now, so the formula that has been shared with us has a 7% discount rate, and we've underwritten the project at a certain IRR level that some of you know from our initial economics that is higher than that. So if we were to do it based upon those economics, the number would be less than the city is likely going to want based upon the current formula. So I think you probably wouldn't want that. But we can have that.
Sometimes I'll take certainty.
Maybe, and so we can share that. And one answer might be, well, we were actually going to recommend to staff because, unfortunately, with everything else that we've been working on over the last 6 weeks to get the CA signed and everything, we haven't had that much time to focus on this. And instead of trying to rush it, we can agree to a formula at SESP. It doesn't have to be now. I mean, it gives us more time to figure this out, and we're going to be in front of you in 6 to 9 months anyway.
So I just raised that issue because I had a little bit of heartburn when we were Fountain Road for the Broad Washington project, because it's not something we've done before, because we still have a little bit of time. It was more of just a general understanding, trying to get it figured out. But it is something that at some point, before we get too far down the road, I'd like for us to at least have some understanding of kind of a baseline path for this project or other projects as to how we get to that number, so it doesn't become contentious to where we've effectively made the idea of seeding an affordable housing fund through a cash and lieu a moot point, because we can agree to what the value of those units are in terms of being net neutral to the developer.
This may help too. We were asked, we had a really good meeting with some of the affordable housing advocates in the city, and there's some discussion about whether they may want some 40% and 80% units, not just 60%. So what we kind of agreed to with them is before we submit our SESP, so this fall, we would work with staff and work with them to figure out what type of units they're going to want, what size, shape, income level, so we can design the building appropriately. And we could also then agree to get the formula right before then as well. So when we're submitting our SESP, we have the right language, and that gives us the 6-month time period while you're reviewing SESP to negotiate and make sure it's right.
Okay. All right. So I don't want to beat this thing.
Yep.
So that I just raised that concern, and it's something that I'd like to solve because I can all right. So on to the. Let's see. Letty asked a question about the net fiscal change. The ingress egress that you guys showed to Virginia Tech is the actual ingress egress that exists now. It's not something new. That kind of U-turn around. I was trying to visualize that because I drove by yesterday.
Ingress egress we showed to Virginia Tech.
Off of Mustang Alley.
Oh, the new road that comes in.
Yeah, it looks
where
to
Commons
be.
comes in.
Yeah. There's it's just kind of a off of Mustang Alley turn drop off.
Oh, that's their existing. Yeah, that's their existing.
is
addition.
existing.
Yeah, that's their loading.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we just connect that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. This. You mean this up here? Yeah. Yeah. That's their existing condition.
Okay. Can you just give me an idea now that you guys have moved the grocery anchor down to the corner of Leesburg Pike and Haycock? Just kind of a visual of what that kind of retail streetscape looks like now. Now that we've added more retail there. I mean, can you just compare it to a project and maybe have a visual of what that looks like? Number of stores. So you're entering the grocery store there at the actual corner. Like that's the main entrance.
Yeah. So this is the grocery store right here.
Yeah.
There's about roughly 20 feet grade from here to here. It's pretty steep. So you have an entrance to the grocery up here, as well as an entrance down the corner. You can come in at this entrance and go up escalators and stairs to get to the main grocery. And then the main grocery is up here on this whole block. So we will have to think about how that facade is treated as we're exactly on the slope.
The reason I ask is I think about targeted tenant though. It just sunk down a little bit great. You've seen it, and it's just not a very prominent entrance. Where you've seen some grocery stores that say it is like a Whole Foods or a nicer grocery store. It's just got a much more prominent entrance, a little bit more.
This will be prominent. A lot of light.
Big, huge open entrance right there at the corner.
So this will be prominent because it's 2 level, basically. Because your entrance is at the bottom and then you go up to the main grocery. So it'll be this huge 35-foot
Similar to, I'm trying to think, maybe the Safeway Georgetown on Wisconsin Avenue. Maybe a good reference point to come in and the store. And at SCSP, we can give other examples, and we'll have renderings at that point. Yeah, the social safe, exactly.
I got an idea.
And we'll do renderings of we'll do renderings of that for the submission for SCSP.
Okay. And then last question for now. So I want to talk about Alley 2 for a second, where that turnaround is. I think somebody had asked a question about turning to the garage. So you don't have the ability, but if folks do happen to turn on to Alley 2 because they've come in off of Leesburg Pike to try to drop off, and let's say they get stuck, their only outlet is to either turn through underneath that what is the hotel, which could potentially flip, or turn back down Alley 3. Do you foresee any problem of people kind of getting jammed up at the garage if they're looking to drop off because they made a wrong turn? How are you going to address wayfinding in time for them not to end up?
Do you mean parents dropping off, or?
Yeah.
So I mean, if a parent does do that, they would have to go this way.
But it'll be prominent enough.
Yeah.
And I mean, because I can't tell, like, architecturally what is right there to let you know that that doesn't continue through to school parking unless there's
No, that'll be
a
clear.
defined wall or something like that.
Yeah, this starts to ramp down to the garage. So you would have literally that will be your entrance to the parking. In fact, that probably it's the gate arms to take a ticket. So there's plenty of stacking.
It's more of getting to, like, the point of no return when you passed Alley 3. You've got people trying to figure out how they get out of there without having to go into the garage.
I think it's
They
similar to
messed
how we
up.
handled it like at Brooklyn Bridge, or on the main street at the main intersection. You make a left into the parking and you have this yellow bar that says you are entering the garage. But we'll have a pretty robust signage package that will come as part of our comprehensive sign plan.
Okay.
That will address stuff like that.
Why no canopy coverage on Alley 2? You got it everywhere else. I mean, you got no trees.
Oh, so the difference is these are real traditional alleys, like true alleys, where it's just meant for cars and pedestrians, not cars. This is meant as a shared space for cars and pedestrians. And so what we've done is to soften some of the edges and keep the cars more focused in the center. We've added some trees to those spaces and also increased canopy coverage. But those are more called sharrows or winners. These are just true alleys going to parking and buildings, so it's not a place we want to encourage pedestrians. And the width of those is smaller, so you wouldn't really have the ability.
Can I
to
have any
things.
landscaping?
Those would not be landscape. Those would be traditional alleys, right?
Right. And then crossing school parking, I know this is a question but I just think about after school when you think about the direction kids would go if they were walking. You've got some kids coming out high school, they want to get a little quicker to Leesburg Pike. I just don't see, other than going through the school entry plaza, you've got that little pathway going to school parking, but does it make sense to have some type of defined area to walk through to end up further down in the development? I mean, it was almost like, I guess if it is a traditional alley, it doesn't allow for pedestrian, but
Right.
so you got that, but I'm talking about further down.
Yeah, we would want kids. We'd want to encourage this. I mean, they may walk through the parking lot, quite frankly.
Is there a way to get from that parking lot into the development other than the
It's here,
north and south?
it's here and here. At some points.
So you have to walk all the way through the parking to get into the development.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're coming out of the high school here, right, likely you would do that connection, is what we're assuming. And if you're coming out of the middle school here, you would like that connection or go this way. But we're not, there's a grade change here as you're going down towards the parking. We may be able to get a sidewalk along that edge. I don't know yet. We haven't designed it. But the idea is not to encourage kids to then walk into the alley. And it might not, I think there's safer ways to get them into the project.
Yeah, I don't have an idea of how big that parking is, but I'm thinking more if you got somebody that comes out and they drop their stuff in their car and then they're going over not having to traverse the entire length of the parking.
So if you think about our old plan where we have the structured garage here, so pretty big, obviously. In this case, if you were coming out of here, you were still going either around here or around here. It's kind of a similar diagram either way. So I don't think it's very different, and I think it's common. It's not a huge building. This is only 300 feet.
Okay.
So it's a football field.
Okay. Good. And then final question. So that hawk signal that you have up there, we were talking about that traffic light. So coming up on Haycock, you come up a little bit of the hill before you go over Northern Virginia. Yeah. Is there going to be anything that's, other than that hawk signal, that would warn people that they need to slow down before they actually see that hawk signal? Because I've seen some people careening over that hill coming down towards Haycock.
So we've done new traffic counts, number one, and then at SESP we'll come in with a more detailed traffic plan once we have a better understanding of it. We've heard that comment as well. So whether it's those signboards that say what speed you're going or something, we'll figure out what the right solution is once we design that
pedestrian
intersection.
crossing.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Just a little bit more on the housing matter. So, it's obvious you've spent a lot of time thinking about this and talking with the Housing Commission and others. Just wonder if in the materials we could devote a little bit more concentrated attention. Doesn't have to be extensive, but the only bullet point that I see that really speaks to housing affordability is pretty far down in the line 832, and it's a bullet point shared with bike share and public art, which are both fine things too. But I mean, as far as I can tell, if you're going to have 900 plus some dwelling units in the project when it's fully built out, then at 6%, this is going to end up being the largest commitment to affordable housing in the city's history since maybe when Tyler Gardens was built right after the war. The original City Center South proposal had a big play for affordable, bless you,
Excuse me.
affordable housing, but of course that never got out of the ground. So I just think that,
It's a question.
sure.
Are you meaning within the VCs you're talking about, or
Well,
In the staff report?
yeah, within the
Oh, within
staff
staff
report,
report, okay.
somewhere where, somewhere, yeah,
it's two pages in the VCs at least.
yeah, right. I mean, believe it or not, I haven't read every single page of the 3-foot stack of documents, but I can assure you that my constituents will not either. And it would be nice if we could give a 30-word description of, what we're doing. I mean, we'll work out all the details that Ross was asking about, but just from, housing affordability is, as you well know, local, regional, national, global issue, and this is, the many fine attributes that this project has, and it has many other fine attributes. That is one that I hope we can emphasize when we're pitching it to our constituents. So I would just ask for that. The other question I get from folks who are within the vicinity of not only this development but other developments that we've done is it's not really a shadow study. It's sort of more like I don't know what the proper term is, but a horizon study. My back fence neighbor wants to know, when Founders Row is all built out, am I going to be able to see it from my back porch?
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, I think the answer to that's no, because first you've got trees blocking through most of it, very much of it. But I'm not sure. And in this case, the 15-story building, the big scary 15-story building that's going to loom over the high school. There's that concern which you're addressing.
Definitely see the buildings.
Yeah, exactly. You will definitely see, and you address the shadow part of it there.
Right.
But if you're living in the house that, say, is on the other side of the fence from where the Staples is, in Fritz Center, what am I going to see out of that 15 stories?
Right.
Is there, at some point in the process, a way to help the community visualize that?
Yeah, we can do. We did this at in Bedford Pike and Rose in Wakeland as well. It's pretty effective. We went around and took photos from some of the neighborhoods and plopped in our three-dimensional drawing before and after. It's pretty easy.
That'd be very helpful. If you could do that, that would be very helpful, I think. The other question, another question is on autonomous vehicles, which has gotten a lot of nice buzz for Mosaic recently. It's a cool factor thing. We're building a cool place here, so autonomous vehicles, how that factors into your planning, and just having that as an element of this development seems to me like it makes sense once it's all connected. Obviously, yours, Pex, and the Ramadas.
You're talking about the shuttle that they're doing at Mosaic?
Everybody, right. I mean, if you're going to shuttle people from Dunloring to Mosaic, that's a good thing because there's not much to see between Dunloring and Mosaic. This, however, would be more like a San Francisco streetcar sort of thing, where the you started at Route 7 and went all the way to the metro, you have an appealing, area that would be nice to play up again, helping sell the future vision element of this thing.
Yeah, I need to learn more about. I know I've heard about that announcement of what they're doing at Mosaic. I don't know much about it. So
Yeah, I
need
mean,
to get up to speed
Dan
on
and
it.
others took us over to National Place, National Park. And we saw Ollie, and I'm not even sure what has happened with Ollie lately. It's a cool thing, and it's something that we'll eventually I'd like to see us talk about that at least here.
And just one note: we have discussed it with Virginia Tech too in our joint meetings with them, and they're some of the national leaders in autonomous vehicles. They were extremely enthusiastic about this as a location for the shuttle service.
That's what I'm talking about. That's the kind of cool thing that people have gone to. Speaking of talking with our partners, we had discussed in one of our other meetings the I-66 access to West Falls Church and the site generally from what is currently now the bus exit off of I-66, which nobody much uses because the buses all stop at Preston. Most of them do. Just want to make sure that as we talk to our partners, if there's a way to get people off of 66 into ours and the other developments without having to get into Haycock Road, by all means, let's explore that, right? So that
Yeah, I think that'll be part of the WMATA and Virginia Tech comp plan process in Fairfax County, talking about signage and wayfinding. We're on the same page.
okay. All right. Two other things. One, any compensation element that's part of this deal that stretches out to 99 years. I just want to make sure that all the mean counters here are good at this. We're getting present dollar value for whatever it is that we pay 30 years, so that we don't end up with some deal where, oh yeah, well, 2020 that was worth $2 million. In 2060 it's worth $50 million. Let's just make sure all the language is written so that we're covered on this book, so that we're getting the proper amount of value adjusted for tomorrow's numbers with investment and so forth. An expression of inflation adjustment as I can come up with. I think you all know what I mean, and I'm just sure somebody's going to ask that question because they think we're all a bunch of doofuses and we haven't thought about it. That's not how we have to look like. We are thinking about it.
We are, and but I will note in the voluntary concessions, and this has really been true in our initial RFP. We're not these VCs. There are not a lot of cash contributions, so generally everything in here is structured so that there are either commitments that are going to be paid no matter what it does cost over time, and so I don't think we have exposure on that in these voluntary concessions. In other voluntary concessions where it's a fixed number, say for the school capital cost contribution, we do have that exposure, and but that's not the case here.
What you do get that's helpful in this proposal that's different than typical. So essentially you have a front-loaded ground lease where you're getting all of our land payments up front. And so obviously there's not an annual ground lease payment over time that will change based upon inflation. But you do get in return for the pilot the $200,000 a year starting in 2029 that escalates every year at 2%, I believe is what we agreed to. And then on top of that you get the capital event fee, thank you.
Yeah.
Every time the project's sold or refinanced, there'll be another payment to the city, and that's going to be based upon the value of those buildings
At the time
and the
the
transaction
event
at the
occurred.
time. Exactly. So those will escalate with the value of the property.
Okay. That's enough for me to, even me to explain briefly to somebody who might ask. And finally, I don't know a lot about economics, but I know enough to know that we're now in the longest sustained period of economic growth in our nation's history, at least since they've been measuring these things. And I sure hope it keeps going, because here we are. We're right where Mr. Snyder and Mr. Z were called when we did City Center South. We had the great scheme, and the global economy collapsed, and we never saw it again. I don't think that'll happen here, even if the county does turn down, but surely it will at some point in the life of this project. But I'm just asking, what is our plan for a pause? Some document, and I like to be positive and hopeful, so I don't want to dwell on the negative, but just to be able to assure people that, I know we've talked about this some, we do have a plan for absorbing some pause. And you as a company, of course, have experience with this. And
Yep.
I think it might be helpful just to give some small attention to that so that we would be able to say, yeah, we understand. And here are 3 things we're going to do. If it turns out that we hit point X, we just have to hold off for a while.
Right. Yeah. So, knocking on plastic. So you're dead right. We've had a great run from an economic perspective, and you've already seen probably a little bit of the jobs numbers in DC are less than they've been in the past. So there already is a little bit of softening in the market, and then the hope is that the incoming Amazon wave will buffer a little bit of the job losses that we're seeing. And you can never tell what's going to happen economically in any given moment in time. The difference, I think, now in comparison to what we all saw in 2007, 2008, 2009, is that was heavily a finance and real estate bubble. And so the real estate market itself was way out ahead of where it probably should have been. And as a result, and that was everything from mortgages being given to people that shouldn't have gotten mortgages for condos and houses, and as well as CMBS distributions and tranches up in New York. So that the real estate market was the driver of a lot of that crash. This crash seems like a more typical, normal market goes up and goes down, but it doesn't feel like in this market there's been a lot of, that the real estate market is overheated in this market. And every economic forecast I go to or panel I go to, people generally agree that we haven't overbuilt this time. If anything, we're way short on residential units needed. And there hasn't been a lot of overbuilding on office either. It's been more of people, office tenants taking smaller space and consolidating, so there's less demand. So our hope is, even if there is a problem, it'll be a short one, and that will come right back out of it. The second part is, in large mixed-use projects, the types of investors we're going to be bringing in as partners are going to be looking for kind of the long-term investment. So there's a benefit that happens for real estate in a shortage, and that construction costs typically do come down. And so as a result, it could be that it's in some ways, as happened with Pike and Rose Phase 1, it's almost ideal to be financing a project, or at least, doing your construction cost agreement during a downturn, because you do get your best pricing. And recessions typically don't last more than 2 to 3 years. So by the time you're delivering, you're coming out of the recession. And the larger financial institutions, that would be the types of partners we'll be looking to understand that. They get that. So it is something that's in all of our minds that we talk about. It's not something we think is going to be a problem, but if it is, we do have in the CA language that allows us to not start construction for a period of time. I think it's 12 months after closing until we have to start construction, according to our schedule of performance. And the schedule of performance does give a little bit of leeway on the back end about delivery of Phase 1, so we have time. So it could be that we deliver a building or two, or we work with the city to figure out how do we get as much done as we can if there's some sort of a downturn. We're going in eyes wide open with that issue, but we're hopeful that won't be a big issue.
Thank you. It's a good segue. My personal opinion on the next downturn is it's not going to be real estate, obviously. It's all that marginal speculation fueled by the uncommonly low interest rates and the CDOs and CLOs. So no one knows where that's going to go.
Right.
But I think, your bottom line is entirely correct that you're probably in a good spot. And so do you have this piece of paper, by the way?
What's that?
It's a piece of paper you don't have, obviously.
Oh, great.
So
Okay.
instead of plowing through 2.5 meters of paper, page and a half, that's about my speed. I would say that, with respect to your discussion and your thinking on wayfinding and the pedestrian versus vehicular interfaces that today I was, for whatever reason, taken by a driver to the Reston Wheelie Metro stop. And if you've ever approached that coming off 267, you know there's only one lane that you have to get into, notwithstanding the fact that it's 5 lanes wide. And it's like the worst nightmare because there's no wayfinding.
Yeah.
Unless you know where you're going, you're never going to get there. And I would just urge you to re-examine all these things you're saying that, for example, alley 2 and 3 are meant for pedestrians. You know they're going to be there. The school parking, you say, well, they're going to be on 7 or Street A. You know that 40% of people are going to be elsewhere. You just can't control human behavior. And so think about making it easy for them instead of putting up barriers that won't stop them anyway. I mean, the wall over the Hilton here is I mean, people jump over it, and cars hit it all the time. So, it's like less than a barrier than a nuisance that has to be repaired.
Okay. Yeah, we can study that at SES.
Yeah. Yeah, just pay some attention. Item number 6 here, with respect to putting electricity in the street bids on constitutes. I'm really heartened by the fact that you're addressing the Haycock Road. I think part of that is you have perhaps looked at our streetscape standards. And there's one thing here I don't see mentioned here, but if you could just put in there with respect to observing the items and guides laid down by our streetscape standards, and it'll address the issue of the backflow preventers.
Okay. Which number are you on? I'm sorry.
Number 6 over here. It's the first and number 6 is over here.
The numbers refer to the VC item.
Not important here.
It's not that I can't count.
So I'm sorry. So what's the question with number 6? Back.
Where it ends with the tree lighting program. So just when you go to the VCs,
We see that, but we don't see the back.
Because there's not mention of it yet, and that's
He's
he's
asking.
saying that there's language in our streetscape standards regarding backflow and
Uh-huh.
preventers, so we can just incorporate.
otherwise you're
something
going to
like
end up
that.
with these big steel boxes in the middle of your tree pits. So, and they need to be.
I think we had that elsewhere. Got it.
Yeah, so they ought to be in your buildings,
Got it.
in your buildings, and not in
I
the
think
tree
we
pit.
have that in our. I think they're in our VCs elsewhere. We agreed to that.
Okay. Well, like I said, I didn't
So we
look.
have to follow it all.
I don't look at it something like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff here with respect to environmental, and I think that I would like to address all that getting to the SESP, because I understand that unless you have some real designs here, all these discussions are based on intangibles. I know that you guys pride yourselves, EYA and P.N. Hoffman, doing great work. To your underutilized bicycle facilities, I'm sorry about that. It is, DC trying to apply a blunt instrument to address an issue, and there's a lesson in all of this for us that, you don't overreach, and at the same time you don't want to underreach. We have, for example, 8 electrical charging stations that have not been, I guess, announced publicly. If they're here, I mean, you can't wayfind these things, but if you are here and you see them, then you'll plug in. And 75% of them are used right now without anyone telling the public about it. And the ones out back would be used if it weren't for these macho sheriffs that are taking up these electrical charging station parking slots with their pickup trucks and other vehicles. So you might want to talk to them about that. Oh, I see. All right. So with regard to EV, I think we're again going to that thinking that I think you guys think great, have great thoughts, have great execution. City staff thinks equally great. I don't have to think great, therefore all I need is a big mouth here. So all I'm saying here is pay attention to that. The fact that I'm not going to pound you into little details and things that I would like to see and things that we have discussed doesn't mean that they're not there. So I await the SESP and other things that will show us and the community and the people that are concerned about these things that when you say you'll try to achieve a 10% reduction in peak runoff or a 10-year flood, that I actually expect that you're going to surprise us pleasantly and do much better.
We appreciate that because it's Laura and I have been focused on this over the last few months with the community and some of our meetings, and it is hard. I think it's this process of doing an SCE and then an SCS piece, so there's a desire to have these decisions made earlier than we have the information to be able to make those decisions. But what we've heard loudly and clearly from this community, which I'll say is different from some other communities, is the importance of environmental, especially on stormwater. And so, we'd be idiots to come in with a plan in 6 months that doesn't have a way of addressing concerns on that. So we've heard it loudly and clearly. And I will say it is different. Like, I've done a ton of entitlement work all throughout every part of the city, and every part of the city has their own things that they focus on and care about. And so you should be proud of that. I mean, Falls Church is up there with Tacoma Park on how much you guys care about the environment, which is really good. And that's not true of what I hear at a lot of community meetings where I go. It's almost the opposite. I mean, here there's less concern about density. There's kind of buy-in that we need this in order to build the school, which is great. And so then it's really practical, tactical things that we can hear.
Well, we think that 10, 15 years from now, after it's finished, that this attention that you will have paid to observing adherence to environmental protocols will be that which distinguishes this project from other projects. And people will come here for that reason alone. And that's an intangible aspect that you cannot even imagine at this point in time, when temperatures and precipitation extremes are going to be such that you'll be able to say, we saw that coming and we planned for that. And to Letty's point about chargers, I think we've had this discussion already. I'm glad that you're putting in additional conduits when this project finally gets to a point where you can say, yeah, let's take advantage of this conduits by floods. So I think hopefully this is going to short. Thank you so much.
Go ahead, Dan.
Thanks a lot. So first, a couple questions about the project. You heard the comment about autonomous vehicles, and frankly, this fits into a larger package. The city made what I thought was an unprecedented move of providing a $15 million transportation grant to be coordinated with you and actually operated by you. So if that's the case, I would ask that the developer in the city on a regular basis report out what they're doing and make it available to the Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation. And generally, as things evolve, because of the unique structure of this in particular, that we make sure that we're staying really at the state of the art, which I think you've heard other council members talk about. So we want to be full participants in how this transportation funding and these transportation components come together. And you've heard a lot of other comments on the transportation side. One specific thing I'd request is that you at least put in with a dotted line BRT station, potentially on Route 7. I don't see it there right now. It's been on some. Okay, that would be great because that project may at some point go, and this would be a great way to say the region's preparing for it. And so that would be a positive addition. So I'm going to wait. Yeah, if you could stipulate BRT, okay, great. And I realize it may need to move, but I think having that on there is a very positive factor, which I'd like to talk about, just as we'd like to talk about this project being really at the state of the art environmentally. We'd like to be Santa Fe with regard to transportation. Also, the other elements of transportation infrastructure, vehicle to vehicle infrastructure. I mean, as was mentioned, autonomous vehicles always gives us an opportunity that will actually help sell the project. So hopefully we can set up some sort of an ongoing forum for particularly the transportation elements. With regard to the environment, Councilmember Z mentioned a couple things. In DC, all the new office buildings have green roofs. Is that going to be true in this? That's great. In fact, in my office there, they're actually selling the herbs every Monday that are grown on the roof over your head. So
we were just talking about that earlier.
I should have bought them and brought it tonight. I forgot. But
I'll say
Depends
that,
on the kind of herbs. Sorry.
yeah,
No, I literally
not
just.
in Virginia.
We were just talking about that on your back porch. That it would be nice if there was some like rosemary or thyme.
Yep.
Not yet. That could be only a DC thing, not in Virginia. So
But yeah, sorry.
per the VCs, we are investigating green roof on the concrete building, which is the office. We're continuing to look at that and many other options, as again understanding the emphasis on stormwater management. So green roofs, bioretention areas within the commons, cisterns. We're just trying to figure out kind of the best way to make stormwater management work, and that's also part of the LEED requirements that are going to be for the different buildings. So now that we're getting started with the design, we will actually be able to start answering this question instead of just saying, wait till
That's
it's
exciting,
complete.
just as a package of elements in the environmental area that people can actually understand will help launch the project very successfully. Same thing in the transportation area. And of course, the runoff regarding a 10-year storm, considering we're having 100-year storms every other week, it's kind of shooting a little too low on that one. And likewise, the fuel that's used, all the rest of it is an air quality issue. I think those were pretty much it on the project itself. Now, going to the VCs, I want to explore this just a little bit. In all our prior projects, we had a school capital VC. Is that right? And am I hearing that we don't have one in this project?
That is correct, and we signaled that very early on in the process, and the reason for that is to capture that value in the actual lease payments as opposed to as a voluntary concession, and so that's why we took that
Can
strategy.
you run a comparison considering the projected school costs, what we would otherwise have required?
Yeah, we can run what we've gotten on other projects on the residential counts that we have, and I can provide that information.
Right, we'd use our model, and then we'd figure out if we did the typical school capital versus the alternative that we provided for them.
Yeah, I've actually run those numbers just out of my own curiosity, and so I have that number. I just don't have it at the tip of my tongue.
Okay, great. Second area of the VCs, I feel, particularly this one, somewhat lacking. We know we're going to have vertical policing at a level literally at a level that we've never had before. We know we're going to need more police officers. So I would suggest somewhere in the VCs there be some sort of public service impact fee. We know we're going to have to hire more police officers. We know that vertical policing takes more time, it's more intensive. I appreciate that there was a space somehow provided in the site, but I'm very concerned about the policing issues and the additional burdens we'll be placing on public safety. A third area is fire and EMS. This whole project area is going to add significantly to EMS needs and to fire service protection needs. And I'm not sure that regionally we've really thought about that enough. So I would ask the city manager to coordinate with Fairfax County and potentially the others to see, do we need to build something into this project? Potentially would be a small fire station in the future, because DC is doing that as well, building fire stations right into their projects. I'm not saying that's the way we have to go. It might fit better somewhere else, but I'm concerned about the increased burden of fire and EMS that this very large increase in population is going to bring. And then the other question you need to answer tonight is sprinklers and what we're requiring in terms of the higher stories, and are we being as aggressive as the current law permits us to be. I think those are the fundamentals. I mean, I'm excited. The project has undergone some major positive changes, but I want to make sure that we're so grappling with some of these other more really basic government issues. So, thank you.
And can I just make a note on the public safety items that are in the VCs? Those are on page 14 and 15. And the fire marshal and the building official do ask for concessions that are above code. And what those are really geared towards is moving buildings, even if they don't meet the standards of a high-rise package, to get some of the critical things that would be in a high-rise package for a mid-rise building. And specifically what those are for is in the event of like the derecho where you have power out for a week, to have the on-site generating capacity sufficient to make those buildings habitable so that there is water pressure, that the corridors are lit, the elevators are functioning, so we don't have a mass evacuation scenario. And we've been asking that consistently for our mid-rise buildings, and those are in these VC packages. So that's important. In terms of our coordination with the county, this is a crucial issue. The coordination with the county has been deep on these issues. They've been allowed to comment on the density, on the uses from all perspectives, but from the public safety perspective as well. And we think that we are positioned to serve this community absolutely, no questions asked, from a fire, EMS perspective. Police, there will be service challenges. There's no question about that. There'll be a lot of calls for service that we anticipate will come out of this. We don't have voluntary concessions to help cover that, but we do anticipate that through our fiscal impact model, the $5 million figure that you've been cited, that is the net after covering the public service, public safety costs. And the way that model is built is to model what the calls of service would be, to model what additional police vehicles will need, what additional equipment and things like that. That's built into the model. And so the taxes from the project are intended to cover those types of services.
And yet we're specifically providing in the VCs for affordable housing, specifically providing for environmental. Why should we not be providing for public service? Thank you.
Hi. So, as I read through this book this weekend, it was literally bursting at the seams because there was so much public comment in it. So that's the first thing I want to say is thank you, Carly. Thank you, everyone who has gone to so much effort to get so much public comment. And it's really obvious the changes that you've made are a response to so many different kinds of comments. So I commend you on that one. And I think we're definitely headed in the right direction on this. And it's better than it was before, because of so much brainstorming and so many ideas from many, many groups, from the CACT to the ESC to Fairfax County schools. So I think that's really important. I have a couple parking questions. I hate to be the person asking the parking questions, but related to the timing of how this is all going to work. So in 2021, January 2021, can you go flip back to the drawing with the school parking lot? That school parking lot's going to have a school on it, right? The school parking lot will have, when the school opens.
Closed, the school will still be there.
Right.
We will then demo the portion of the school first that's up in that parking lot,
Okay.
so that we can deliver it to the schools, to the Gilbane team, by June. There's a date specific in the.
It's a 4-month from the high school turnover condition.
So we'll hand it back over to Gilbane to then finish the parking lot.
So Gilbane will do that parking lot.
Yes, and if for some reason we don't start demolition within by a certain date, the Gilbane team will have the right to do that demolition and have us essentially reimburse for that.
So in that time period, will the school be lower on parking in that time period from the time the school opens?
So that's been a subject of a lot of planning and discussion through the Wednesday infrastructure planning meetings. and there is a sketch of where the schools intend for their parking to occur during that interim period. And that's one option. The other option is to have the parking on the WMATA site or the Virginia Tech site. WMATA, those, we kind of know what that deal would be. We also know what the Virginia Tech deal would be. So I think we're still evaluating what is the best way to serve our teachers and the community in terms of the parking.
And then on voluntary concession, is it 18? No,
Page 15?
no, the voluntary concession. Nope, 15. It's 15. Where it
15?
says
Item 15?
item 15, voluntary concession. There's only one of them. The last sentence says, as agreed to, the schools are permitted to use half of the Phase 2 Block B parcel for parking during Phase 1 construction. So what do you envision that looking like?
So that essentially, if we would draw that line straight through the middle of this phase 2 building,
Okay.
the schools would essentially get that original surface parking lot that was in the plan, and then this portion of that office construction staging.
Okay.
And so that's to try to maximize the amount of surface spaces the schools can get until the office building gets built.
Okay. And so how many years is that? When do we think Phase 2 is going to start?
Probably phase 2 office if we stabilize the first office building in 2026. So the phase 2 office building is probably starting construction in 26, 27 right now.
There's another volunteer concession about the parking garage cladding surrounding, and I know there are a lot of pictures in here. And we had originally talked about when the parking garage was on Leesburg Pike, having something different involving the schools. I'm assuming you still intend to do that when it fronts on Mustang Alley.
But we still intend to do something more attractive than a typical garage, and we'll come in at SCSP with elevations on the sides of the garage. We haven't designed that yet. It probably won't be as extensive as we were originally intending,
Right.
because that front on our 7, but we'll
Right.
do something attractive.
Okay. And the bollards, the traffic pattern, when we had talked about this a few other times, there were bollards that were going to go up during certain times, and they're still in the plan?
Yeah, so if this goes through and the drop-off goes through, those bollards will be right there when it's working.
Okay. And then when it's not school pickup and drop off, you could actually cut through that parking lot, Street A to Mustang Alley?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. So another thing I really like about this site is Alley 1 and Alley 3 there, where you can make a right-hand turn into the project separately, and the same with the cut through in the parking lot. It makes it much more permeable than it was before. I think that's a good thing. Do we have an official name for this site?
We don't yet.
Okay.
So,
Because we call it the Economic Development Project and Gateway and Little City Commons. And
so
when will that happen?
go for it.
Yeah. So I think responding to needing a name for it, but also to the emphasis that's been put on the history of this space itself and the character of Falls Church, we are actually going to be starting to do some historical research to get a little bit more inspiration for a name, and then we plan to bring in a branding firm after we do that to help us with that. So that's something I think will be up for discussion more end of the year. We'll, I think, want community input, but we need a little more information before we can start getting community input on it.
Yeah, so the branding, once we get to that point and the branding process starts, we'll coordinate with the city and with schools as well, because we know that you're going to want that input and part of the process too. The Virginia Tech and WMATA sites, one of the questions we need to figure out is there a name for this area, which is the whole 35 acres, including Virginia Tech and WMATA, and then maybe the project has a name beyond that too? Or is it just this is its own thing and Virginia Tech's its own thing? So I think part of the process will be understanding what's the best thing for the city and for the community, and it may be that bigger is better, and then we, in that case, would also include Virginia Tech in the naming, so
Right.
it could be a process.
Okay. And just an offer, I have somehow become the school's archivist, so I have lots and lots of information about the history of Falls Church schools.
Oh, okay, great.
I will
We
connect
need
you
that,
to our
so-
history researcher.
So it's all there, and I know Mr. Snyder is also a historian and has a lot of information about Falls Church history as well.
Great. Yeah, and we'll want that also not just for the naming, but also for placemaking. So
Right.
there may be other things we want that are part of the
That's great. And then the picture of Haycock Road. was there another picture that was a little more detailed of the,
Section?
just that section or the widening of the sidewalk there? That's the first time I've really seen it that way. Right there, yeah. The tree pits will be our streetscape tree pits, right? Those are just
Yeah, so their
drawings.
streetscape standards, they're wider than your standard. I think your standard is 6. And then instead of having a tree pit and then space, a tree pit and
Right.
space, we want to put them together to maximize the
Okay, but
and
they'll
they
be
may be groups of 2 or 3. We haven't gotten that.
oval and flush and everything else that fits in with our streetscape plan.
Right.
Okay. So I like that. I like that narrowing of the road, especially for pedestrians and all that access. All right. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you much. I'm sorry, I took a red eye last night, so I'm kind of still recovering. And that's so my apologies for being a little bit out of it this evening. I've got a few comments or questions, and I want to start with one that affects our school board, since we still have a representative here. With respect to the building, I think, I don't know if you can pop the site plan up back on the screen, but at least one of your buildings is basically going to have like a 0 setback, which, as I understand it, would then require a 20-foot setback on the school site.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, so this building is 9-foot setback, and these are the 0 lot line, essentially 18 inches. So we do have an exhibit that we're negotiating as part of the comprehensive agreement that would show essentially running along that edge where the schools wouldn't be able to build a building within that space. They could have green space, they can do other things with it, they can access the buildings, but the building line would have to be 20 feet off of the building face
Basically, your building.
in order to have windows. That's the main.
Yeah, so normally you'd do like a 10 and 10. Each side would do a 10-foot setback. So I just want to make sure, does the school board understand that? You're welcome to come up and speak into a mic, but essentially what's happening or what's proposed is that some of the buildings along the lot line with the school are proposed to be right on the lot line. And as you just heard, because of building code, you don't want to fire going from one side to the other. You got to be able to get out of buildings and like them not having a setback makes you have a bigger setback to essentially make up their setback. So along the red line where the school parking is, and then the building above that, the school board wouldn't be able to build a school facility, for example, that had windows. And I'm not sure even if it doesn't have windows. I think you still have a setback for your windows if it's not right on the lot line. And so I think even if they had to be 20 feet if they want to have their windows, but if they don't have any, even if they don't have windows,
The only way for us to have windows on the lot line is for the schools to allow for an easement that says that they won't build in that zone. And so the 20 feet, just to give you a sense of scale, well, we have an exhibit that we're working with the city, but that's 9 feet right there. So you can see how this building is set back 9 feet from the property line. So the schools would typically, you'll have 11 feet on the side. You wouldn't build anyway. That's a very typical condition. And then here would be the full 20 feet. And so it does have some restriction as to what happens in the future on the school property, but it's one of the things we need square footage to fit.
and I understand it. I just want to make sure that they understand it. Does the school board understand that? And you're welcome to come speak in this.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm not in a position to comment right now on whether the school board understands. Of course, we will be having a discussion of this at our meeting this Tuesday night. But certainly we have access to all the material and everything that we can make sure we understand the recommendations. I'm just not in a position to speak whether the board members themselves are satisfied.
I guess what I'm trying to make sure is that we don't.
Discussed it at the last school board presentation a week or two ago. So we made everyone aware. We've had that conversation in our regular coordinating meeting with Dr. Noonan. So it's definitely been something people are aware of, and we've created an exhibit for it. But
That's going to affect you for the next 100 years. Basically, if you want to put a building 86 years from now, 10 foot back or whatever, you can't do it. And I guess there'll be an easement you want to put on land records that basically restrict what you can do or can't do in that zone. So anyway, I guess all I'm saying is that before we agree to it, I just want to make sure you guys understand it and it's agreeable to you. If you have objection to it, now would be the time. Maybe not the second, but in the next week, because we're going to approve this the next week, right? Potentially a week from tonight, right? So anyway, I just want to make sure that is out there for you all to consider. Okay. that's the only portion that I know you were intending to leave, so that was the only portion that was related to you all. So, all right, so I've got a couple more comments that don't affect the schools. The median on Haycock, I know you talked about tightening up the travel lanes. Is there no longer a median on Haycock Road now?
So so this section is taken right here, where we would have a left turn lane project.
So we are essentially getting rid of the median to also incorporate the left turn lanes into the site. And so we are narrowing the road, but also minimizing in order to add the left turn.
So right now there's a pretty good sized median. I can't remember how much, but I'm thinking like maybe 8 or 10 feet. 13.6, so that's going away in its entirety. I mean, I have to say I do have some concern about that. And my kids walked across that street a million times, going to middle school and high school, and it's nice to have some refuge across, crossing at least where the hawk signal is, because the traffic just can be kind of weird there. One side could be great, the other side's not great. There's a crossing guard in the morning, but I don't think there's a crossing guard throughout the day. I guess all I would say is that I would ask you maybe to give some consideration of a small refuge someplace, maybe particularly where the hawk signal is, for kids getting across the street.
So we'll incorporate, so the left turn lanes, you're going to have a median before you enter into each turn lane. And so in the areas where the crossings are, we will incorporate refuge.
Anyway, just give some thought to an adequate size, because you got school kids, right? You got a ton of kids walking across, and we want to encourage, to a greater extent than is current, to have kids walk to school. And so I guess I would just say I would give some consideration, additional consideration, making sure that although you're narrowing up the lanes, and that's helpful in a lot of ways, making sure we have safe refuge to cross the street is also, I think, pretty important. This comment also about the alley between the two office buildings, I have to say I think you ought to have some landscaping and make that not just sort of the back door of the buildings, but actually an attractive way for people, because we want this to be a pedestrian development where those office folks want to shop and do other things and not walk across an alley that has nothing, right? I mean, it sounds the way it's being described, there's no landscaping at all. It's just basically like a 5-foot sidewalk.
It's not, it's an alley. I mean, it's like just like in DC, between every office building and an alley to access parking. It's the exact, every city has that as another condition.
So how would you get, if you're in the second office building?
You would come right out onto Leesburg Pike and walk.
But how about at the interior? You wouldn't be able to, I mean, I suspect most people don't want to walk on Leesburg Pike, the top of the building. Go up to the top, there's no...
There wouldn't be a pedestrian exit alley. So the lobby of the office building would be right here, and you would come out the lobby right onto the 7, which is a 20-foot wide sidewalk, and walk from the front if you want pedestrians out there. It's, we're going to detail along this front end. So we don't want people coming out in the alley. That's kind of the design of the building by intent. And if you think about the hierarchy of roads and projects, you have to have a back access. You got to have a place for your loading and your
Got it, but
and I mean, we wouldn't be able to make that alley work because it's a narrower alley and tree pits, because you won't be able to get the trucks through the loading. So we do have to have some streets in the project that act as loading projects for some of the buildings.
So, but the top of that building, the one that's not 7, the other end, again, to me, naturally, people are not going to want to walk on a major road that has an ingress-egress point. Like, in other words, as soon as you walk out the door, there's an ingress-egress point as well. Isn't there a break in 7 between the two office buildings? So, I mean, it seems to me like people would probably naturally want to go up the other way. Can you describe the sidewalk scenario on the top end of that?
I mean,
there's only one point of ingress-egress for the building. There's no second entrance to the building.
We haven't gotten into that level of design yet at all. This may end up being a pedestrian-oriented space to some extent because we have the hotel lobby back here. So to the extent that is, then we can figure out a way to get, maybe there's an exit out the back or something.
I mean, that's what I would recommend, that you consider that as well, like not just a one-sided building on 7, but actually ideally 4-sided, but certainly 3 or 2. You got the school on the other side as well that we care about. That's our view. So anyway, I guess I would just suggest to you maybe considering trying to make the top side of those buildings pedestrian oriented and some trees as well if you can. My next comment relates to the ADUs. I do think we ought to try to have some kind of objective means for considering. I mean, looking at this, it talks about net neutral to the developer or to the owner. I mean, to me, it's really shouldn't be the owner's perspective, or if you want to say the city's perspective, more like a third-party perspective. In other words, it's net revenue neutral to a third party, to an appraiser, or someone like that, not necessarily to you that has your own kind of baggage, or necessarily the city. But in other words, what's the objective cost to it, as from a third party, not necessarily your view of what's net neutral or ours, but what is, essentially a third party's view of that. What I don't want to do is get into this. It's kind of like you go to a rug shop and you say, I really like that rug. And they say, oh, that's the most expensive rug. We come in and say, we need some money. Oh, well, that's, it's not that much. In other words, it's going to cost us X dollars to do it. And that's from your perspective.
Yeah, I think we should agree to a formula at SEHP that's very specific.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. Let's see. My next comment relates to bike share. I know you haven't designed all this to the nth degree, but even just putting some placeholders down maybe for like a bike share station too, I think would be kind of nice, just showing that it is a consideration, important consideration.
We do have that on the plan.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And also, has there been any federal realty investment or FRIT involvement at all in sort of the design of the crosswalks? Are they kind of paying attention to this or not really?
To some extent, I had a meeting with their president recently, about 2-3 months ago, where I walked through the project. And then federal participated in the recent West End master plan charrette. So the woman that's managing the project, Vicky Johnson, I used to work with her, so we talked about the project quite a bit. So yeah, they've been as up to speed as they want to be.
And that concerns me. I mean, because to me, designing the ingress-egress points on our side is directly going to impact the viability and how their site's going to work in the future. And you're not going to change it, right? So once you guys put that concrete, it ain't moving.
Yeah, and we did share that with them. Yeah, it's hard to get, until they have an idea of what they might want to do, it's hard to get them to focus on that issue. But I know that we've designed it in a way that it should work. Like the block diagram should work for them.
Yeah, I mean, the extent you guys need to keep shaking them to just get them to pay attention, I think it would behoove everyone, frankly.
You can have a follow-up.
Also, in terms of the commitment for subsidies for the music school, how is that addressed through this? I mean, obviously that's something we've discussed, but how is it to kind of ensure that those levels of commitment are kind of what I think everyone anticipates?
So it's in our. So we have a financial performer that we shared with the city confidentially that has all the economics in it. So the city has that, and that's that's our commitment, and it kind of gives you a sense of the rent, the subsidy that we're getting for the rent. I don't want to talk about that publicly, but
that's fine. I don't want any numbers. I guess I just want to make sure that there's an enforceable mechanism from the city side, not that it's just aspiration, or this is our intent. Because we've had another project, frankly, like 8 years ago, they said we're going to put this music school in, and then it kind of fell apart with the details. Well, how much are you going to subsidize? We don't want to subsidize it. Okay, well, they're probably going to show up here. And I guess in terms of whatever document, is that in the CA that you're performing?
So it's in the actual. Do we refer to it in the CA, the business plan? So here's the way I would say it. We have a business plan which we've submitted to the city, which is our economic plan for the project, that has the subsidy in it. So there is a subsidy in our numbers. I can't tell you that subsidy will 100% work for that specific tenant, although hope is important. But there's, if it's not them, we will find other tenants that are equally as good where the subsidy is appropriate.
So in terms of just for us at this table, how do we know that you will actually make that subsidy? I mean, you may say, well, it's in our self-interest and the like, but what commitment do we have that you will, at the appropriate time, pony up that subsidy?
I guess the equivalent, what you get is we're required to do those types of tenants. So as long as as long as the right type of tenant, and you have an approval right for the type of tenant. So we have.
But the tenant is something like educational. I mean, I know the city attorney.
Yeah, but it says that the city approves. So we do have to go back to the city at some point. If it's not the specific tenant you're talking about, it's someone else. We're going to have a conversation with the city and say, what do you think of this guys? So.
Yeah, but I don't know if we, to my recollection, we don't approve the particular tenant. It's the use that we approve.
Right.
So, but in terms of, I don't know if the city attorney would want to chime in. about, in terms of essentially, quote, enforcing the level of subsidy that has been shared with us, maybe privately.
We wouldn't. I don't know that we would agree to that, because if we get a great tenant that is that need, right? Is this awesome school that everyone's excited about, and they're willing to pay X dollars more in rent, and the deal works, like, that's great. That should work. Everyone should be happy. And so,
I guess my concern is this: that I can't remember the exact language of the use. What is, maybe the city attorney can enforce. What's the language of the use of that area? It's something like educational purposes of a.
I don't really have it at the tip of my tongue. I don't know, Carly, if you remember what was the language used for the use that was going to be the school.
yeah. So
But education, so education is pretty broad.
It says educational studio. So I mean, it's not just an academic. It's not like a school. It's like a studio. It's a performing arts space.
I got you. I mean, look, I don't want to beat this dead horse, but I do have some concern that's fairly broad use, and I think all of us in this room probably have an idea what is intended by this. Yeah. And I just want to make sure that at some point, maybe it's another developer doesn't say, well, this is an educational, whatever the terminology you just read, and it's not really what we're all thinking about. And so I guess I want to make sure that if there's a way to ensure that you'll pony up to the limit that was shown to get kind of what I think we all want. And so I don't know how to, I don't want to, again, kind of beat the dead horse on that, but I just want to ensure that we do, in fact, you put forth that commitment that you've done, shared privately or confidentially with us. All right, so let's see. On the garage, could you elaborate a little bit on that? We just talked briefly about that. I know it's not as prominent as it was before, but what's your intention with cladding on the garage or facade on the garage?
It's down. Yeah, I can go to the. Okay, sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure. So we do have one plan in here that starts to show a little bit of design. We haven't. This is very early, so at SCSP you'll see what we're doing. But the idea is similar to what we had proposed on the other garage, but we're also showing some architectural brickwork instead of murals on the garage. We just haven't gotten that far.
And what's your commitment for that in the VCs and the like?
It's not a VC commitment. It's when we come in for SCSP, you guys can consider this.
Okay. Well, I guess I would just say personally, just speaking for myself, I'm not going to want to see precast concrete, like some white precast concrete bolted together. I would hope to see something, substantially more attractive. It could be green wall, could be some kind of masonry panels or whatever. But so that's for setting expectations for you all. That would be my hope. What we would see.
Yeah, there probably will be. I mean, like at Pike Road, for example, some of the precast is visible, and some of it has brick. It's a mixture of both. You can design it in a way and shows render. But we also want to be careful. We've moved it to a part of the project that's less visible purposely, and so part of this was to make the economics work. So we're not spending as much money on the fenestration that we would have spent on the location, but we'll make it an attractive garage. You'll see it in elevation.
All right. That's all I've got at this point. Do folks have other additional questions or comments about anything? You don't like brick? You want? Okay. All right. Well, we're gonna have obviously we'll have some further.
We're gonna battle it out.
No, noted.
So you all like precast concrete? I don't know. All right. Well,
I call it graffiti.
all right. Well, anyway, we'll have
And I hate graffiti.
a lively discussion when the
Don't
time
like
comes.
Can we take a vote on who likes brick versus art?
I don't like brick either.
All right. Well, anyway, that'll be obviously subject to some further.
Concern on affordable housing.
All right. Does anyone else have any other questions, comments, Mr. Stein?
Just one quick thing, the Historical Commission made some comments, and hopefully they can make us that should be considered. Thank you.
The subsidy for the education school, whatever we called it, and the subsidy, do you assume that it's for the life of the project, or how long are you making that commitment? So well, it's not a commitment. What have you assumed?
So our commitment is to have, for the life of the project, those uses in that space, this kind of cool arts, performing arts type tenant that the city has the right to weigh in on. So, and that's, in the PCs.
If you found
if I find a performing arts tenant that's really successful and doing great, so I'll give you an example. There's a dance studio in DC where it's insanely successful, and they pay really decent rent. They don't pay market rent, but pretty decent rent. So if that ends up being the right tenant, then that, you guys shouldn't care. That's more value, more tax revenue for the city, provided you're getting the use. That's what everybody cares about. And the use is a 99-year commitment. The rent level and the subsidy may vary over time, right? If that tenant's really successful, and it might be the opposite. If the tenant's less successful, we may have to increase our subsidy. So it's really, to us, less about what the subsidy is. It's more about the use and making sure it's the right tenant. And so I'm happy to work with staff and make sure that the language is appropriate to ensure that. But
I mean, my concern was something like the idea, and I know this isn't exactly on point, but the idea like a karate school, all of a sudden, and I know this is not music, but all of a sudden a karate school equals an educational whatever use. And so that's what I'm trying to prevent, that we end up with something kind of lesser than what we'd thought. And I can't think of what that particular thing would be at this moment, but I do think there's a broad range of what could be. For example, we have a school, I can't remember the name, what's the place that opened in the Tinner Hill building on the end that does robots and things? Yeah, Code Ninjas. It's a very cool place, but it's not maybe what we're all thinking about as far as, and that's it's not entertainment, it's not music, but at the same time, there's a pretty broad range of things that could be considered educational uses that maybe not be the high-end thing that I think we're all trying to get there.
And what I'd say also is, so the idea originally was that we'd be providing the types of spaces that students coming out of the school would want to go to class after school, whatever it may be, so whether that's a dance studio, a music studio, it could be a karate studio, not that that's what anyone thinking of, frankly. But the idea is that it's active uses that is going to be exciting to the school community and the parents of the kids in the school. And music is where we're focused. That's what we want to do. But we don't, who knows, right, what's going to be the thing that is in need in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. So maybe, let me talk with Carly and Wyatt, and let's look through the DC language and see how we tighten it in a way, if possible, if we needed.
I mean, again, my expectation is not like I said, karate school or something like that. I think the idea that we had shared originally was sort of a higher end product, a music school that would be fitting with your venue and things like that really be kind of synergistic to that. And my hope is that we don't sort of drop down to, something that we maybe already have a lot of or that's not as exciting a product.
No, we understand that.
And we want to just tighten up. I just want to make sure the language is tight enough to kind of ensure what it sounds like we're both talking about right now.
Okay. So is your concern to keep it music focused?
I think so. I mean, I haven't really thought this through enough, but that's what we'd been told and what we discussed, that it would be complementary or synergistic with like a kind of music venue. And so that was my understanding.
We can't have it be so specific that we have zero leverage in negotiating with the tenant. So if it's like, it has to be a music school, then they're going to pay no rent because they know that they have to do the school. So there needs to be some competition in there in order for us to get a deal that makes sense. Even with the subsidy that we're providing. So, right now our thoughts is it's either going to be a music school or a dance school. Those are the two things that we're focused on. So performing arts is generally where we're headed as well.
Yeah.
So I think we're aligned. That's what we want. But it's really important to us that we are careful not to get too specific. And then we're also happy to work with the city and keep staff involved in this process over the next 3, 4, 6 months as we figure out what the tenant is. I think that's probably the best way to do it. I think you have a right in here to approve who the tenant is.
Sorry.
I was trying to move off the topic.
I want to stay on the topic.
Go ahead then.
Yeah, it's on. No, well, so using the word synergy, right? You're talking about kids coming out of school, going to a music class or a dance class, and that works well because we have a music venue. I think beyond just the physical music venue that we have on site, think about the synergy with Virginia Tech site next door, and I think about how cool it would be that you had students that left high school, went over there, and it was a makerspace with really robots.
True.
Dan always talks about 3D printing livers.
Right, or an arts place.
Whatever
right.
it is, right? So I mean, as much as I love music and dance, I think it's fantastic. I for one, like the idea of you opening it up. It is educational, it's not performing arts, but there's still definitely a synergy with the development next door, and we've got a great robotics program. I think it'd be awesome if there was something that fit well from a synergistic perspective of that too. So
Maybe
I
it's
would be willing
creative
to open
arts.
it up, but again, I know it's always been the intent to have
Performing, I mean, we have it as performing and
I mean,
education-based
something I would
arts.
say is I would not want it to end up being something like that we already have a lot of. You know, hey, we got a yoga studio in there or something like that, because that could be
I don't
considered. So anyway, that's just the general concern. I don't want to beat this anymore.
They're
but-
dancing, music, or it's robots. I mean, that's
Those are the only three options. Yeah.
it's
All right, what do you have, Letty?
So I guess if we can just maybe close this out, I think we would prefer to leave the language as it is now, continue to involve the staff in our discussions, and we understand what you're saying. I think we just need to make sure for the economic benefit of the project, for the balance of the project, that we have the options to get the right things. Again, we're not trying to cram a yoga studio in. Some flexibility, and when we come to our first SESP submission, I think we'll have more clarity on the direction that we're going in. But
And hopefully have the tenant done.
I don't want to make any promises about that, but that's definitely the direction that we're going in. So,
So I don't know. It's kind of hard to do this at the table right now. I would say maybe once you spend some more time with staff, I think everybody understands at least some of our concerns, and so I think we'd like to address that and make sure that's as tight as we can get it. And nobody wants to tie your hands behind your back, but we do want to get what we've told people they're going to get. And I think there has been a lot of discussion along the way about what is going to be there or should be there. I just don't want to make sure that doesn't get watered down over time. So anyway, Letty?
They are still, by the way, that's still our approach.
Okay.
We're not.
Well, that's why I wanted to get to the point of the subsidy, because it would be easier to move to Plan B if you don't have to subsidize Plan B as much, because it makes more economic sense, right? And so if you had the possibility of moving to the yoga studio with no subsidy, or a music school with a substantial subsidy, I mean, it would make most economic sense for you to go to the yoga studio.
Yeah, let
But
us
that's
think
sort
about
of
that.
different than what I think has been proffered to the community.
Okay.
yeah, I think we'll.
I have an
that
idea.
conversation
I have an
then.
idea for how we might be able to handle that.
All right, Letty?
Yes. So for all the uses on VC number 2, I think the assumption is that these are for the life of the project.
Yes.
We don't specify that. Is there legal language that should be in there that
VCs are recorded, right?
do we need any language that says that these uses, that if you down the road, if the 4,000 square feet of educational, whatever, dancing robot studio does not work out, like, do we get to maintain that use?
Well, they will not have the ability to put another use in that space without council approval. They'd have to come in with an amendment to this SEE to get approval for a different
So
use.
just the language right now is fine. It gives us the perpetuity essentially.
That's correct, because those are the only approved uses that they have the right to put in there, unless they get an amendment on it, commit for something else.
I didn't.
Thank you all. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, we have another agenda item.
Oh.
You do?
It's related.
Forgot about
It's the
that.
school conveyance.
I need to stay for that. Just kidding. Carly said that.
You guys want to take a 5-minute break? All right, let's take a 5-minute break.
Yeah, the air
Is there anything-
conditioning.
Is there anything controversial in this? Next
Um,
topic?
I don't think so.
Okay, then I'm out of here.
Carol, do you want to handle the next item?
No, I we already went through this. Carly kept saying, well, whatever you want, and I said, well, if you do whatever I'm gonna do. Somehow she wasn't liking that idea. I need a plan. I just have fill some lines erased, but I guess we don't have that. So let's
Wait.
just put, let's see, 4.
But their staff report says phase 1 is 5 million.
Phase 2
What
is
is that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is okay. I'll use the pointer to point out, just leave that one.
Oh, okay.
So is that you go there?
Just to get an idea.
No?
So then they have to have enough some of this property to buy this. They can cash. So. Let's see. Make things elsewhere. State, I
I'll just people like to say
I
so.
feel like this is what we learned was that without, just getting money, it's just not enough.
All right, you guys ready?
Okay.
Let's bang out whatever we got left to do.
Okay.
Shields, you want to take us to the next Ms. McCroskey?
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Carol for a discussion of what these resolutions would do and how they will work.
So the resolutions are designed to enable an exchange of property between the school board and the city in order to provide for the economic development. And the drawing or the attachment 4, which is shown up here on the screen, and it's a little bit hard to see. The paper copy's a little bit easier because some of the lines are lighter, but it gives us essentially the parcels of land that exist now and that will be done as part of a subdivision. So parcel A, which is up here at the top, and parcel B on this back side, those two pieces will be sort of moving together. They're currently owned by the city. They will be conveyed under this exchange to the school board as it's contemplated. And then the school board currently owns everything from the inside of B all the way to Haycock Road. And that parcel exists today. Part of the subdivision that's being created that the Planning Commission had before it tonight will create a new parcel, which is this piece, parcel D, and that is going to be the relevant development portion for to be used with a partner. You can see the little notch that allows for that phase 2 office building that was talked about earlier. But so essentially what we're doing, what's before you tonight or will be next week, are the exchange of parcels A and B to the school board, and the parcel D will come from the school board. That'll be conveyed to the city so that ultimately it can be conveyed then to the EDA, who will then enter into the ground lease with the developer. You'll be asked to approve 3 documents. There's an exchange agreement, which is a basic agreement. The draft is attachment 8 to the report. It sets forth the plan to exchange the parcels and the terms under which we will do it. It's a pretty basic agreement being between the school board and the city, but it provides for when the closing will be and how that will be handled. And then there is a deed of re-subdivision, vacation, rededication, dedications, and conveyances. And this deed, it's one deed, it does a lot of things. First of all, it'll be signed by both the school board and the city council. It creates this re-subdivision. As I said, the only new parcel really that's being created is parcel D, but everything's being renamed. And since the city and the school board are both owners of property within it, we would both sign it. So it'll re-subdivide that. It will vacate certain property lines and rededicate them to create those new parcels. There will be the conveyances. There's brief paragraphs in there, one from the school board to the city, one from the city to the school board that does the exchange we just talked about. It will also contain a dedication of a public access, a right of public access over what will be Mustang Alley, as well as the right to put an easement for utilities purposes in that property. And that's really the deed. The third document, which you don't have yet because we are working on it still with the school board staff, is a lease. The purpose of the lease will be that once parcel D is conveyed to the city, and we expect all that to happen shortly after the approvals, then the city will lease back to the school board the area on which the school sits and will continue to be used until the new school is built. The lease will not have compensation to the city until such time as there might be a problem with getting the school turned over in time. And if it's late and the city is going to be liable for damages to the developer because we can't provide the property that we have agreed to provide them under the comprehensive agreement, then we would have to pay them some damages. Those damages will be covered by our rent with the, from the school board. So it's been arranged that the school board has a specific insurance provision that has been added on for this purpose that will enable them to pay us in the event the lease has to get extended. It enables them to provide this insurance coverage to pay us the rent that will be in the amount that we would owe under the comprehensive agreement to the developer, so that we would be protected against the cost of those payments in the event of such a delay.
You got an additional certificate just to make sure the schools are covered. So Gilbane covers it while they control the property, but we, just to make sure we're fully covered, the school's got a certificate of insurance as well.
It's not, it's not clear that Gilbane's insurance would be able to pay all of that, but there's a specific additional expense provision which they added to their insurance for this purpose, and it covers the amount of their additional expense in the lease, and that's exactly the amount of our damages we would have to pay.
We asked the schools to get this insurance. They did so, and we did discuss to them, if there's a big cost of this, then, we need to discuss that, how that's going to be covered. They did not raise that as an issue. And just as for context, schools have a lot of capital facilities, and their insurance covers that. This add-on was actually pretty minor compared to all of the other insurance that they already have. So I think they didn't have any increase in cost at all, but they didn't ask for us to cover it.
Good to be prepared for this scenario. My only concern was if it was created this circular problem where we're paying ourselves for extra insurance in order to pay for this scenario, which then doesn't make sense.
So a quick question. Since the developer has the right of suing the city for damages, which we're now talking about how to fund, do we have the ability to sue the developer if they don't move forward? But I hear tonight they had a year that they can postpone everything for a year. Can we postpone not turning over the property for a year, or do we face damages even though they...
No, they would face damages if they're in default. So there are conditions to closing, and our only condition to closing is that the high school is built and that the land is available to them. And so that's what we're discussing right here. If they are in default, then they forfeit their initial payment, and so that's the major leverage that the city has.
And I think the year that they were talking about is built into that's the time frame for doing the work. So in other words, they can't be a year late, but they have some float time built into their schedule.
Right. So what we're discussing right here is, suppose they don't sign the ground lease. That is the default where they lose their payment, number one. In the city, if we don't sign the ground lease because the high school is not ready, then we have damages against the city, basically to help cover their carrying costs, and that's what the insurance will cover.
Kind of like business interruption insurance, I think, that like if there's a casualty and it takes longer to deliver it, they have to pay rent, but that their insurance covers. It will pass on to that.
So the circumstances are just, one is, hey, Gilbane's just late, but so they're 2 months late. Okay, well then how's that covered? That's treated in the comprehensive agreement. Then there's the other one that the mayor just mentioned. Suppose the brand new high school burns down to the ground, and so now we have a 2-year delay to build a whole new high school. The insurance will cover that type of a major casualty as well.
We do have, there are several months built in there of additional time, given the current plan by Gilbane, which is to finish by December. So none of this would kick in until late in the next summer.
Or anything else on this?
I think that's all unless other people have questions.
You've discussed this with the school board and they're on board and they're going to do the
Yes.
same document that we're doing? Is that-
Yes, the
We're all going to vote on the same.
right. The exchange agreement has been agreed to. The deed has been agreed to, although I think the draft, we have some property descriptions that just have to be filled in. And then we are still talking about the final terms of the lease, but I need to hear back from them on our comments that we provided.
But the school board is scheduled to act on July 9th, the day after the city council.
And they've seen at least drafts of all the documents at this point.
All right, anything else? Anything else to be talking about tonight?
Our, the subdivision code requires subdivision names to go through the historical commission for approval. And so we sent, actually, we didn't send them any names, I don't think. We just said, provide some names. And so that's what they came up with. And there is used to be a Barrett that lived in the Barrett family. That's all I know.
There's actually
I could,
basis in this, which is
There
why
usually
I
is, yeah.
said the historical commission made a number of recommendations which need to be considered. But I'm sure it can be renamed. So.
That sounds like a plan. Anybody got anything else? All right, let's adjourn.
Thank you, council.
All right.